Chapter 5. Martell. Summary. King's Landing cedes to the king in the north. Please just name your terms, King Robb, and we will meet them. Aye, what? What is going on? They broke apart to a squawking Arya and a silent courtyard. Sansa felt her lips twitch in what was sure to be hysterical laughter. Jon, beside her, ducked his head and remained quiet. Sansa tipped her head to the side and saw Willa open her mouth, glee suffusing her features. Sansa spoke then, not because she wanted to, rather because she was sure that if she heard whatever Willa was thinking, she'd turn an entirely undignified scarlet. Arya, I'm sure I don't need to explain what a relationship is. Sansa paused for a beat to let Arya say something. When she only gaped at her soundlessly, Sansa continued, feeling caught between desperation and a rising bout of giggles. I can explain it to you if... What I meant, Arya bit out, finally finding her voice, is why, Jon? Why are you kissing our brother? Cousin, Jon cut in. Robb's legitimized me, too, if you were. You know, wondering. He trailed off at Arya's withering look. You know what, I think my horse needs to be taken care of. I'll just be over there. He jerked a finger back over to his men, if you want to talk to me. And the man who is known for being one of the best war commanders in Robb's army, the man who'd single-handedly broken 3 sieges and thrown Kevin Lannister in chains, he turned and ran, without so much as a look backwards. Arya, Sansa said, stepping forward and speaking lowly. How long? Arya. How long? I don't know. Arya cut her a disbelieving look. She saw Alice step forward, grinning at Jon. Sansa pursed her lips and motioned for Arya to follow her, which Arya did, irritably. They ended up in a small storeroom off the entrance hall. Sansa barred the door and turned to Arya resignedly. I don't know, she said. I just... Before we went to King's Landing? Arya demanded. Before that? When, Sansa? On the way back, Sansa said finally. That's when it started for me, at least. When I started to feel it. But we didn't do anything until after Peter was captured. And you love him? Yes, thought Sansa. More than you can know. He knows the darkest parts of me and still loves me. He sees me at my worst and doesn't turn from it. Sometimes I don't think I know how to live without loving him. Yes, she said quietly. Arya looked up at her, eyes dark and hard. Sansa felt a pit form in her stomach at the sight. If Arya hated this idea so much, if Arya were to denounce them entirely in the end, it might not change much, but it would hurt. Arya was her sister and Jon's sister too. Her opinion held weight. But if Sansa had spent these past few weeks growing older, growing wiser, her sister had done no less. Arya sighed, abruptly, and scrubbed a hand down her face in the same manner that their father did when faced with something distressing. For you, said Arya, I am doing this for you. For you and for Jon. I'm not getting you a wedding present or anything for your anniversaries from here on out. And he's my brother, do you understand? Nothing is going to change that. Sansa reached forward to catch Arya's hand. Arya stepped away. Nothing, she said. Do you promise, Sansa? Sansa nodded. He'll always be your brother, Arya. I do not doubt it. I don't think he's ever not loved you. I don't think he can love you. Nothing I or anyone does can change that. Then you've my blessing. Arya raised her chin and then grinned wryly, all boyish strands of hair and sliding, shifty eyes. For what it's worth. A great deal, I assure you. There was a pause, and then... Just don't kiss Jon in front of me, please. Now that I cannot promise. Sansa. Sansa didn't giggle, but it was a close thing. A moment later, she dodged Arya's punch and then twisted because she wouldn't be herself if she didn't give as good as she got. It was nice, in the end, to have someone's acceptance. You have the Kingslayer, Jon said incredulously. A smile played across Sansa's face, and 34 other hostages. He gaped at her. What? How did that happen? How did you? Lyra said it was 100 Lannisters. 112. 112 Lannisters at your gates. Jon threw up his hands. How did you defeat them? Sansa looked at him, bright-eyed and beautiful. I spent 3 weeks crafting battle plans, she said. And when our food stores ran low, I led 300 women out of this castle and into battle. And you won, Jon said flatly. Her smile grew into a grin. And we won, she agreed. Later, she'd tell him the precise battle plans. Later, Sansa would tell him how they broke the Lannisters. Later, Sansa would take him to the dungeons and present each captive, and they'd decide their fates. But right then, all she did was step forward, arms wrapping around his neck, and kissed him hard enough that Jon was hard-pressed to remember his own name, much less some foolish Lannister's fate. To the King in the North. Robb, I address this to you as my brother, and not the King. I'm sure you've heard that there was a force of 100 Lannisters came north to Last Hearth, besieging us for weeks on end. They were aided by Boltons. Ramsay Snow, bastard of Roose Bolton, led them through the Dreadfort and brought them here. The army was defeated a week ago. We have the Kingslayer and various other highborn Lannisters as hostages. Jon arrived yesterday. We are under no attack. Last Hearth is held by your men. Stay safe, and we shall hopefully see each other soon. From the hand of your beloved sister, Sansa Stark, Princess of the North. To Sir Jon Targaryen. There's a rider coming to Last Hearth with more information. Good job. Please tell Sansa that next time she sends me a letter telling me an army that was just besieging the castle she was inside is defeated, some detail would be appreciated. Again, good job. Stay safe, and we shall hopefully see each other soon. Robb Stark, King in the North. I never liked fighting, Jarrell said quietly. Alice looked at her and arched an eyebrow. There are rumors that your mother put a sword in your hand the day you were born. Foolish, Jarrell snorted. Didn't let Lyra hold one until she turned 6, and she was just chomping at the bit to have one. But I always feel really uneasy holding one, you know? Too much power. Too much something. I'd be happy to never have to hold one again. But you're good at it, said Arya. Idara arched an eyebrow. What does that have to do with anything? Different people take to different things. I couldn't bear to so much as look at that mutton stew Alice loves, but she eats it daily. Still, they were all sitting or sprawling, as the case may be, in Sansa's solar. Willa and Winifred had fought, again, and so were sulking in their separate bedchambers, and Mira was writing a letter to her brother, but the rest were mostly just relaxing as had been customary when they had the time. There was something nice in spending time with people who were in similar positions, with people who had fought in battle beside you and risked their lives for you. Some like swords, Idara said with a delicate shrug. Some, like you, Arya, love it and can't live without it. Others, like Alice, love it and can live without it. Others, like Jarrell, don't love it but can bear it. And then there are people like me who cannot bear it at all. We are our own people, first and foremost. I'd think you, of all people, could understand it. Another would call it cowardice, Arya said. Jarrell shoved her with her knee reproachfully. Adara hated what we were going to do, but she did what she could. Not everyone can be the hero on the battlefield, Arya. Arya smirked at her. Not everyone can be me, you mean? Idara peered at the small stitches in the cloth she was embroidering, lips twitching at just the corners. I think, she commented, Jarrell meant that not everyone wants to be you. Oh, hissed Alice. That's cruel, Idara. Let the girl have some confidence left, yes? 'Tis cruel to take it all away. Hey, Arya snapped. She heard Jarrell stifle a snicker into her sleeve, and then Alice threw her head back and laughed, wild and free. Edoras smiled at Arya apologetically, and after that, there was nothing Arya could do but laugh too. A rider is coming, Sansa said flatly, staring at Jon. He and the rider, Edoras' brother, wilted slightly. That's all Robb said in his letter. I'd expect you to expand upon that sentence, Jon, because I, for one, didn't know what to expect with the rider. I certainly didn't expect this. Neither did I, he protested. Robb could have been referring to anything. I didn't think. He'd do this? Jon winced. He'd tell you like this. So you knew that he was planning this, Sansa said. And for the past 2 weeks, for all the conversations we have had, you didn't think this was important to tell me. It slipped my mind. Her council, seated around the table, looked amused. What were you doing so diligently? Willa asked, tone full of enough insinuation to make both Jon and Sansa flush an ugly red. She leaned forward, eyes bright and teasing. We're fascinated, Lord Targaryen, truly. Tell us everything. I don't want to be here, muttered Arya. Sansa took a deep, fortifying breath and threw the package in her arms onto the table. It rattled and she felt her ribs rattle with it. How was one supposed to react when your brother decided that he didn't want the responsibility of ruling? Or at least didn't want to rule alone? Robb had sent Udera's brother to Last Hearth with 3 crowns, one each for Sansa, Arya, and Bran. And he'd only told Jon to crown Sansa, presumably Arya's and Bran's coronation was optional. Tell me again slowly where he got this idea. Jon again winced. Well, it all began when you were angry. You know, when Robb didn't tell you he was sending you to Last Hearth, and you and Arya were so bloody furious. We made his life miserable, Arya told Mira quietly, though not quietly enough that nobody could hear. Gods, it was so difficult burning his toast I couldn't even sleep that night, had to lie in wait in the kitchens for the cook to come. And it was worth it, I swear, every part. I understand, Mira murmured. Jojen is not that bad, but sometimes he gets very irritating. Adara only tilted a look at her brother, who was shrinking into the tapestries behind him, looking as if he wished desperately to be anywhere but where he was presently. If the interruptions continue, Sansa said sharply, I'm sending everyone outside. So you can spend more time with your lover? Willa asked gleefully. I didn't think you so adventurous, princess, nor so bold. Sansa frowned, and Willa went on through Winifred's desperate attempts at silencing her. In broad daylight, taking a man to bed, why, one might think it salacious. Though I suppose you aren't taking him to bed, are you? Arya half retched, and Sansa pointed at the door. Out, she snapped. Get out! And the next time I hear you being so disrespectful, Willa, I will have Winifred cut off every last bit of your hair. Don't think I won't. At Willa's snort, Sansa arched an eyebrow. She's still angry that you didn't tell her about your knee, you know. Willa's knee had been injured in the battle, and it had been worse than Sansa's shoulder ever had the chance to get. Winifred had scarcely managed to salvage her sister's leg, and it seemed that Willa might have a limp for the rest of her life. Winifred was still bitter about it, and Sansa wasn't above using that for her gain. Shooting a dirty look over her shoulder, Willa left. The others followed slowly, reluctantly. Sansa waited for them impatiently. As soon as the door closed, she slumped into her chair and rubbed her temples, breathing deeply. After a long, irritable pause, she turned to Jon. You didn't mention that when you told me everything else, she said. Jon grimaced. I wanted you to laugh. I thought you'd find it funny that Robb was being so dramatic. And I might have added this too, but, well, you got angry. It was her turn to wince. Sansa had, And it was really because everything had been a confluence of Rob's secrecy, and then her parents' support of Rob's decisions, and then her own hurt pride. She'd snapped at Jon, and while it wasn't completely undeserving, neither had it been kind of her. So it was a jape at first, Sansa prompted when Jon looked hesitant. Right. Then it became something like, why not? Then Jon breathed deep. Then it was repeated enough times, and we were maybe a little drunk, and I remembered old Nan's tales, and, well, do you remember what she said of Garth Greenhand's children? Sansa blinked. No, she said frankly. He was a conqueror, wasn't he? I didn't pay attention to the songs that weren't romantic. The bloody ones weren't that interesting. Those were the only ones that were interesting, said Jon, and then shook away her protests. Anyways, Garth's children were each given crowns, and he broke apart his kingdom into pieces for each of them, and they each were called kings or queens as it were. Garth Greenhand, Sansa exhaled sharply and slumped into her seat. He's a legend, Jon. We can't use that as a basis for our government. The basis of our government is Rob's decisions, Jon said simply. And the gods know that he needs someone to tell him when he's being stupid. It isn't sustainable. If you all survive everything that's happening in the future, and all of you marry, and all of you have children, then you can decide what's going to happen. He shrugged. Until then, it makes sense if we have enough rulers to hold the North through the worst of the long night. All of you have different strengths, and you'll have to work together to survive. And what makes Rob so much better a leader than the rest of you? She sighed, tracing the whorls of the table. And what of Rickon? When he's grown to 15, we'll make that decision. Sansa yet hesitated, and Jon leaned forward, catching her hand in his. For just a heartbeat, she wondered how it might have been had the two of them not been who they were. A better world, Sansa decided. But they weren't just two people in love with each other. They were princesses and knights, Targaryens and Starks. They were children shaping the world they wanted to inherit. For all that Sansa might have been happy in another world, this love wouldn't have been forged in blood and fear. For all that she might have been content, she'd not have been half as strong, and this love wasn't the measure of her life. So when Jon said firmly, "Accept the crown," Sansa reached one trembling hand and drew the largest crown from the sack. Chin up. You are a Stark, and you can be brave. You will be brave. Tell me, Jon, she whispered, and now she was the one holding on to him. In one hand she held the crown, and in another she held Jon, and if anyone dared to tell her that she couldn't have both, Sansa would remake the world until she could. Tell me, would you be willing to take a queen as your wife? So this is the Kingslayer. Jaime lolled his head upwards to meet the man's voice. It was strange, in all honesty, after spending so long with only women entering and exiting these rooms. Recognition was slow in coming, but when it did, he wanted to turn and hide. Weren't Ned Stark's daughters enough of a torment? Why did he have to face his bastard son, too? Are your accommodations survivable? The bastard asked. I'm here, aren't I? He asked sourly. Aye. How did it feel to be bested by a group of women who haven't yet seen their 20th name day? Miserable. Jaime folded himself inwards and glared at the floor. If you've only come to gloat, congratulations, you've done it. Now leave. The bastard had sounded amused before, but now his voice was only hard. I came to ask you who put you in touch with Ramsay, he said. I came to ask one question, Kingslayer, and if you answer it properly, you won't have to worry about anyone else coming and asking more things so long as you're in these walls. Why should I answer you? Jaime asked. When the bastard chose to focus on settling against his chair instead of answering, Jaime smirked. Because you'll leave me alone? I'm more irritating than you could ever hope to be, Stark bastard or no. Oh, you haven't heard? The bastard arched an eyebrow. I'm no Stark bastard, not any longer. Turns out Lord Stark kept some secrets, and, well, my father was never a Stark, Kingslayer, though my mother was." His lips quirked. "My father was Rhaegar Targaryen. To keep me safe from Robert Baratheon, Lord Stark claimed me as his own. When he found out, Robb had me legitimized, so it's now Jon Targaryen who stands before you." "Such love," Jaime spat. Jon Targaryen sighed. "Anyhow, what matters is that you speak to me, Kingslayer, because there will be consequences if you don't." Because Jaime couldn't believe these women and children could devise such horrific things, and also because they were raised by the Honorable Ned Stark, he asked, "Like what?" "Like asking your bannermen the same question," Jon answered levelly, "and getting impatient when they, too, refuse to answer." "Impatience is supposed to frighten me?" "My dire wolf is supposed to frighten you," he said. "Did you know they respond to our emotions?" "Oh, don't worry, Kingslayer, we won't touch you, not a bit. We need you as a hostage. But your men? They're rather fair game." "You're threatening." "I'm promising," Jon said flatly. "I'm promising that if you don't answer me truthfully, that if I'm not satisfied, I'm going to send you back to your father's arms with your bannermen in a box that will fit in your arms, and you'll have to tell each of their families why they don't even have the bones to bury." Ramsay's scream, cut short by a direwolf's jaws to his throat. The red raw pieces that had littered the ground afterwards. The meaty, panting breaths of a shadow-black direwolf waiting for Jaime to breathe wrong. Jaime breathed deep and tried to slow his pounding heart. "What do you want to know?" Jon leaned forward, arms braced against his thighs. "Did Roose Bolton speak to your father?" "Yes," Jaime said immediately. "I've seen the letters." "Who sent the first one?" "I don't know." At Jon's abrupt movement towards the door, Jaime snapped, "I don't. I only saw them in passing, enough to see their flayed man in the seal. Nothing more." Slowly, he seated himself. "Fine. How did you come this far north?" "Ramsay Snow met us at the neck and gave northern uniforms. Then he took us through the Dreadfort and up the river and led us here." "Why did the Boltons side with you?" Jaime shrugged. "They thought your cousin would fail and wanted insurance. If they made him fail by taking the entire North hostage, well, we promised them Winterfell, and that made them very happy. I don't know, do I? I don't claim to have deep knowledge of your northern politics, as primitive as all of you are." "You don't seem to have deep knowledge of anything," muttered Jon, and then shook his head. "Very well. Last question. What would you have done if you had taken the castle?" "I'd have taken your sisters and brother hostage," Jaime said slowly. "I would have married some of their ladies to some of my bannermen, and then sent ravens to the major houses telling them what they would do if they wanted to ever see their daughters again." "Just as I thought," he said, and rose to his feet. "Very well. I thank you for your cooperation, Kingslayer." "Roose Bolton," Robb said, "by the laws of the North, you are to be killed for treason. Do you have any last words?" "You will fail," said Roose, pale eyes gleaming with hatred. "You will fail, boy. What are you trying to achieve? How much vengeance is enough? You're a child, and all the men fighting beside you are fools, and worse to think, you'll lead them to victory when you don't even know what that is." "I'm your king," Robb said lowly. "You knelt and gave me this crown. If you'd spoken to me of this in private, I might have listened. But you went to the Lannisters instead, and you sent your bastard son to lead them to where my sisters were, and I cannot forgive that." His hands were tight on the hilt of his sword, and there was a roar in his ears like a rising tide. Robb inhaled, set his shoulders, and said, "Kneel." The sword descended, and when Roose's head landed in the earth, Robb turned and met his bannermen's gazes. "If there are Bolton bannermen who wish to hold to their lord's treason, they can choose either exile or death." Robb let all his grief, his betrayal, his rage show. "Leave tonight, and I will not send a single man after your heads." The next morning, he asked the Great John how many men had left under the cover of darkness. The Great John smiled, sharp and fierce, his teeth shining like fangs. He said, "Not a one, my lord." A week later, as the sun rose, the entire keep arranged itself in the great hall for Sansa's coronation. Sansa drew the gown's heavy fur neckline tighter around her shoulders. It was a fine blue, so pale it looked almost white, and it had taken Adara and 3 other women 4 days to make it. Everyone was waiting for her, but Sansa couldn't help but stall for a few more minutes. At another time, she had wanted so desperately to be queen, and it had led to such disaster. Here, she'd be content to have the ability to control her life. Sansa had her family beside her, and that was all she'd ever wanted. The chance to have both had never been so much as dreamt of. "You are Sansa Stark, you are a Stark. You will bend before you break, and you will break before you die, and you will survive the darkest things that can be thrown at you. You will fight. You will defend what you must and conquer what you can. Chin up, darling." Slowly, steadily, she left the safety of the shadows and moved down the corridor. A half-beat later, she turned the corner and saw the crowd. Sansa did not falter an inch, did not let herself pause for even a heartbeat. She seated herself on the wooden chair which would serve as her throne, and looked out into the overcrowded hall. In the front row was her council, each dressed in a gown of their own choosing. Rickon was seated beside Arya, whom she'd insisted on sitting closer to her throne than any other. Jon stood beside her, already holding the crown. "By the edict written by King Robb Stark's own hand," he announced, "I present this woman here before you as queen. Princess Sansa of the House Stark is to become queen in the north, of equal rank to her brother in all. Do you, the representatives of the northern houses, assent?" As one, her council rose, but it was Alice alone who stepped forward and said, "King Robb offered out our father's vengeance, and they proclaimed him the king in the north. When the Lannisters came, however, it was Princess Sansa who put steel in our hands and told us to stand strong." She knelt. "The North has known no queen for 3 centuries. 'Tis fitting that the first to bear the crown is the kindest, bravest woman in all the North. I say, I'll bend the knee to Queen Sansa and I'll defend her to my grave." "Lady Alice speaks truly," said Adara. "We are the women of the North, we are the Valkyries of the North, and there is not one person here who can say that she has not led us well." She too knelt, and threw her head back, cried, "The Queen in the North!" When Robb was crowned, his men drew swords. For Sansa's coronation, they threw flowers into the air, blue roses, thorns, and all. The petals caught in her hair, and when she ran a hand through them, they fell to the ground like so many pieces of the sky. "Thank you," said Sansa. "I will never forget this. I will never forget all of you. You fought beside me. You fought for me. And if I am here to be crowned, it is because of your valor." She swallowed hard and then stretched a hand out to Arya. "Come here," Sansa ordered. Arya shot her a strange look, but obeyed. When she stood next to her, Sansa nodded to Adara's brother and waited for him to walk up the aisle. As he walked down it, whispers rose around him, confusion, and in its wake surprised realization. But for all that we fought together, for all that each of us held and held strong that day, the battle would not have been won if not for Arya's courage. Sansa felt a small smile turn the corners of her lips up. "And I believe it is a proper act, for the first act of the first Queen of Winter in 300 years to be to crown another." I'll agree to this," said Willa, suddenly smiling wide and hard enough to rend open a man's stomach. "You put steel in our hands and offered us vengeance when any other would have bowed their heads. You led us into battle with no crown save for that red hair, and we flocked to you as if it were one. And your sister took down the Kingslayer himself. She led women out of those gates and drew enough food from the woods that we could last for another week. She was the one to give us even a hint of a warning. What other woman can compare? What other woman can stand where the two of you do?
They've named your brother the Young Wolf,
Mira said, stepping forward to flank Willa.
They call him King Rob the Valiant,
and the small folk from the Twins to Riverrun know and adore him.
Why should we not do the same?
Willa went down on her knees, gracefully. She plucked a blue rose from one of the vases flanking the tables, the stem long enough to treat as a sword, and held it aloft.
All hail Queen Sansa the Merciful,
she cried. The council knelt, as well, and then the other women followed them.
All hail Queen Arya the Vengeful.
And in that moment, the rising sun cut through the paned glass windows, spilling over the whole hall, gilding the hall in a halo of brilliant gold. Sansa felt her breath catch at the beauty, at the power these women offered her so unthinkingly, so easily, at the trust being forged in the room right before her eyes. Breathing deep, she picked up the crown and turned to Arya. Easily, calmly, Arya went down to her knees and Sansa placed the steel ring on her brow. Willa tipped her head back, and she grinned brilliantly at Sansa, and then called loud and clear, "All hail the Queens of Winter!" Others took up the cry, and it echoed loud enough that Sansa couldn't hear herself speak. But she did turn slightly and saw Jon watching her from right behind. His eyes were soft, and he was smiling just as brightly as Arya, and there was such love in his expression that Sansa felt her breath catch and tears rise in her eyes. She beckoned him forward and took his hand, lacing their fingers together tight enough to whiten her knuckles. "You will stand beside me," she thought. "You will stand beside me for the rest of my days, I swear it. You will stand beside me, not behind me, not in front. You will stand beside me and we will rule the North together." And so, that night Sansa went to the Godswood. This was smaller, more private. Only the men Jon was closest to amongst the 20 rode north, and then Sansa's council, Arya, and Rickon. There were small lights that Mira had strung up with Jarrell, a type of moss, Mira had told her, that shone like the stars under moonlight, and they glittered around the heart tree like so many lanterns. Jon wore a doublet of lightest gray, and in the dim light, she was sure she'd never seen someone so handsome. Later, they'd have a larger wedding in Winterfell, but before that, they'd have this between them and them alone. Before the heart tree, she reached out and took his hands. "Sansa of the House Stark comes before the old gods," she said. "She is a woman grown, and she comes to be wedded." "Jon of the House Targaryen comes before the old gods," Jon echoed, eyes warm enough to make Sansa's cheeks flare with heat. "He is a man grown, and he comes to be wedded." His voice softened, lowered, became more private. "Will you take me, Queen Sansa?" "With all my heart," Sansa murmured, eyes unflinching, eyes unwavering, eyes unrelenting. "And you, Lord Jon? Will you take me?" "Aye," he said. Breathed in and went on. "From this day until the end of my days, I swear it! I swear to stand beside you. I swear to protect you, love you, and give you all that I am and have. I swear it by every god who is listening, and all those who don't care to." It felt as inevitable as the tides, as the sunrise, as the turn of the stars. It felt as hot as wildfire and as welcoming as a hearth fire. Sansa looked up at Jon and felt as if he'd cut open her ribcage, as if he'd crawled inside her lungs and rested right beside her heart. It felt as if she did the same. "And I swear to stand beside you," she whispered. "To love you until I breathe my last, and to offer you everything I am, everything I own. I swear it by the old gods and the new." "I love you," Sansa thought, and traced an unshaking hand up his jaw before kissing him soundly. Their father sent a raven telling of a company of 200 men riding to Last Hearth. They were to escort Sansa, Arya, and the 30-odd Lannister captives back south to Winterfell. Sansa had expected them to side-eye her, and they did. She had expected them to avoid her, and they did. She had expected them to treat her half as a precious glass statue and half as a fire-burnt corpse, and they did. What she hadn't expected was the small folks' awe. When they stopped in a village, they clustered around Sansa and Arya, whispering and reaching for them. They asked them to bless their children, bless their marriages, bless their dead family. The whispers of Sansa's beauty and kindness left her uncomfortable, but it was Arya who stammered and almost ran when they began praising her valor. Queen Sansa, the Merciful, they called her, and Sansa would have cheerfully strangled Willow with her bare hands had they been within a day's ride of her. When they cheered for Arya, naming her the Vengeful, Sansa placed Jon and Ghost as a rotating guard around her for almost 2 days before she was sure Arya wouldn't run back to Last Earth and slit Willow's throat in her sleep. "You married?" Sansa waited a beat, and then 2, and then turned to smile pleasantly at Bran. "Yes." To Jon. "Yes." "But..." Bran looked adorably confused, the poor boy. How? "I'm going to be putting a crown on your head tomorrow," Arya said repressively, eyes bright with humor. "I don't suppose you need one of your sisters to explain the details, do you?" At Bran's suddenly horrified expression, Sansa took pity on him. "It's been happening for a while," she shrugged. "And when Robb decided to crown me, the idiot, I decided that being queen should come with a few perks. Up to and including deciding my own husband." "Did you court at least?" Arya choked on her drink. "I don't want to know," she half-wailed, setting the cup down, slamming it down. "I don't care! Just let me spar with Jon and sew some wounds shut, Sansa. I don't want to know what and how and why you fell in whatever this is." "Love?" Sansa asked dryly. "No!" Arya glared at her. "I want to act like nothing's different, and my own brother has betrayed me. He's betrayed his queen." "I can see your broken heart," Sansa said. Arya stamped a foot. It achieved practically nothing. All of them were seated, and the only thing that happened was that the table vibrated slightly. Sansa knew solely because she was sitting opposite Arya and saw her leg move. Sansa sent her an unimpressed look. Arya huffed, cheeks a blotchy red, and flounced out of the room. "She'll be fine by tomorrow morning, right?" Bran asked. "She'll be fine in 5 minutes," Sansa told him. "The trip down from Last Hearth was cold, and we didn't stop for breakfast or dinner. And Arya hasn't touched her food tonight. She'll be back soon, mark my words." Once they'd arrived, it had taken less than 10 minutes for Rickon to tell their father of the marriage. The shade Jon turned was impressive, Sansa had decided. She'd never before seen him so pale, and that was including when he'd drunk half a tavern's ale. And then he and her father had disappeared into the solar, and Sansa hadn't heard anything from that wing of Winterfell ever since. She shook her worry off decidedly and turned to Bran. "What have you been doing? I mean, while Arya and I were off fighting in mud and all." Bran brightened slightly. "I fought with Sir Roderick last week, and usually he wins, but this time I climbed the tower wall and jumped on him. It's the first time I won a match." "Oh," Sansa said, and then leaned in conspiratorially. "Don't tell Robb I told you, but he didn't manage to do it until he turned 14. "I'm 11. "I know," she grinned. "Guess you got the brains in the family." "Like you," he said. "You won against the Kingslayer because you were smart." "Well," she quirked her lips, "it wasn't just my head that allowed us to win. I had lots of friends beside me. And really, we won because the Kingslayer and his men were stupid. Which is something you should know, Bran. Don't ever think that just because you have all the cards, the others don't have any." "I wish I'd been there," he muttered. "So you could fight?" Sansa asked. At his nod, she sighed. "You've time, Bran. No need to go looking for a fight. It'll come to you quick enough." "Then why am I being crowned?" Bran demanded, blue eyes wide, Sansa's eyes, Robb's eyes, their mother's eyes. Why are you giving me a crown, Sansa, if I haven't done anything? Because the North needs a king, she said. Robb's gone south, hasn't he? We need a king right here. We're Starks, Bran. Don't you worry about becoming something great or famous. It'll happen when it happens. And if it doesn't, then that doesn't make you any less worthy of that crown. I'll just have it because I'm your brother. You'll have it because we think you deserve it, Sansa corrected. Because you are our brother, and because you know more of Winterfell than almost anyone else alive, and because you know how to make everyone smile. We want you to stand beside us, Bran, not just because you are our brother, but also because we need you. Will you crown Rickon too? He asked. When Rickon's old enough, yes. Bran paused, and Sansa seized the chance to reach out and grip his hand. Winter is coming, she said softly. The North needs rulers that are strong, that it can trust when winter arrives. She arched an eyebrow. But you don't have to worry over all of that right now. What do I have to do? He asked, sulking. Sansa got out of her chair and prodded him until he too got up. You've got to come with me, she said. If we go to the kitchens now, there might be some cake still left over. Later that night, her father walked into the library, lost in thought. Sansa had been stitching. After Bran fell asleep in the kitchen, she had taken him to his rooms and then retreated to the library with her embroidery. I hope you didn't kill Jon, Father, she said as casually as she could manage. He jumped slightly before focusing on her. No, Jon is fine. We just had a very long talk. On certain important things. Like respect, he replied. And trust and honor. I'd wished you had told me, Sansa. I wouldn't have disapproved. But Mother would have, Sansa said. And Robb and Arya, well, I was angry, Father, and a little afraid too, and just I love him. She shrugged helplessly. If Robb decides that he needs to marry one of us off to seal an alliance, I couldn't bear it to be me. And there are other Targaryens in the world. Jon is a Stark. First and foremost, you know he's taken my last name, don't you? I heard. Her father smiled. Jon Stark's something he's wanted all his life. And you've saved each other from other, unwanted marriages with this. But did you fall into something you wanted? I love him, she said simply, and that was the end of it. They marched south to Rosby and took it, but it was a costly victory. The Mountain escaped, and in doing so rampaged through a company of nearly 100 soldiers. The Glovers wanted to chase after him, but Robb looked at his maps, looked at his mother, looked at Theon, and he said heavily, "We have too much else to do. Leave him for the River-Run soldiers." Robb smoothed down the edges of the map. If we are to win this war, we'll need more allies. If I am to take King's Landing, or even Duskendale, I'll need a navy. My father, Theon offered. Robb remembered what Sansa had told him. Years ago, Theon was afraid. He tried to be something he wasn't, and it resulted in so much heartbreak. Don't judge him for what he hasn't done, but don't allow him to go to his father, either. You can't trust him to be loyal to you if you do. No, he turned away and nodded to the green, lush fields in the southwest of the continent. The Red Wine Fleet. It's time we brought this war to the Reach, don't you think? Rise, King Brandon, said Arya, and stepped back so she was in line with Sansa and Jon. All hail King Brandon, Jon called, and Winterfell cheered. To my lovely sister. Any advice on how to deal with the Tyrells? Beware, Lady Olenna, the mother of Mace Tyrell, and do not promise yours or anyone else's hand in marriage. Stay strong, Robb. This will be over soon. Love. Sansa. Why should we join you? Mace Tyrell asked. Robb very, very carefully did not smile. Because I'm going to win this war, he said. I can do it with or without your fleet, Lord Tyrell, but I'd like to do it beside you. I'm going to win this war, and I'm offering you the chance to join me. Will you hold to it? There was a pause, where Lord Mace went a blistering red and looked as confused as he was irritated, and still did not answer Robb. Robb, his mother murmured, putting a hand on his arm. Then she looked at the others and laughed lightly. You'll have to forgive my son. He's a northerner, and they speak bluntly. I understand your hesitance, my lord, I do. Tywin Lannister is a frightening man indeed to rebel against, but we're not asking for anything that will cripple you. You're asking for the Red Wine Fleet, he snapped. That isn't nothing, my lady. No, she said, but I'm sure you've some method of cloaking your banners. And my son has met the Lannisters in over 20 battles, my lord, and he has won each of them. My daughter has the Kingslayer in chains in the north, and the Westerlands are all but destroyed. All that is left is King's Landing and Duskendale. We can take both, Robb said. Then why do you need us? Lord Mace asked. Because I can take both cities, but thousands will die in the doing. Robb nodded to the Lady Olenna, who sat behind her son, eyes as watchful as Sansa had warned. I have no wish to bury them if I do not need to. No? Lady Olenna asked. A king that dares to care for his men, this is something we haven't seen in overlong. She smiled. Some might say that we shall not continue to see it for overlong. Is that a threat? He asked sharply. Just an observation, Lady Olenna said airily. His mother leaned forward. Paint your fleet blue and white, she said, and we will remember your aid for 100 years. Turn your faces and we shall remember Highgarden's cowardice for just as long. The North remembers, Lady Olenna, Lord Tyrell. We always have, and always will. She dipped into a slight curtsy and then addressed Lady Olenna alone. You've 3 days to give us your answer. Our thanks for your hospitality. Robb offered her his arm, and together they walked out. They took Duskendale, and right outside the walls, Tywin Lannister met a sword to his throat. Robb had his body embalmed and sent to King's Landing. They have Jaime, Tyrion said. They've killed our father, and they've cut off our food trains, and according to the news from runners at Sharp Point, there's a fleet of ships coming at us from the bay, painted with the Tyrell roses. The small folk hate us. Less than a fourth of the nobility remains inside this city, and your son insists on holding a 5-course meal every bloody day. You are the hand, Cersei hissed. There's still a host of guards in the city. Do your job for once in your life and defend us. Defend who? He asked. You? Your bastard son? How dare you? You've hated me since I was born, Tyrion told her. I hold no great hope of defending the city, not when the bulk of our army has already been defeated. Cersei looked angry enough to breathe fire. Her hair fluttered in disarray, and Tyrion wondered when he'd last seen her so unhinged. Perhaps it had been upon hearing of Jaime's capture. She'd locked herself in her rooms for almost 2 days, refusing everyone, along with food and water. But even then, she'd emerged from the confinement looking as magnificent as ever. No, the only time he'd ever seen her so mad had been when their father's body was brought to King's Landing by Westerland prisoners. It had taken 3 men to drag her away, and Cersei had gone screaming the whole way, demanding those men be burned alive. As the hours passed, in fact, she looked more and more crazed. You'll be confined to your rooms, Tyrion said when she didn't look to have regained the ability to speak yet. And on the morrow, I will surrender to Robb Stark. If you do this, as Cersei snarled, I will wait, and I will watch, and the moment they so much as blink, I will tear your tiny little head off of your misshapen body. Do I make myself clear? Tyrion took 1 step towards her. You see, those threats ought to frighten me. But all I can think is that even if your vengeance would happen, in the end it'd be a better world than the one in which I fought. He bowed. Good day, sister. King's Landing cedes to the king in the north. Please just name your terms, King Robb, and we will meet them. Fly white banners from the turrets. Have all knights and lords arranged outside the walls in 3 days, without weapons, along with King Joffrey and his mother. Surrender your crowns and your swords to me, and we shall treat you as highborn hostages. Refuse, and we shall paint the land with your blood. Catelyn rode out with Robb, a guard of just under 500 men surrounding them. The knights were, indeed, arranged outside the keep as Robb had asked. That much was clear from all the glittering armor. And there were swords piled at one end, stacked neatly. At the front, Lord Tyrion awaited them. Robb dismounted Grey Wing when he was close enough. "You have the crown?" he asked brusquely. "Yes," said Tyrion, and knelt. "As Hand of the King, I surrender King's Landing to you." He motioned for Joffrey to step out of the crowd. Joffrey insisted on giving the crown himself, he explained, voice almost too faint for Catelyn to hear. Joffrey Lannister, Sansa had told her what this boy had done in another world. The beatings, the torture, even the idea would have been enough to make Catelyn's blood boil. But this boy, for all that had happened, hadn't yet proven to be the same heartless monster. Robb had told her the night before that he wouldn't ask for his or his mother's head. As she watched, Joffrey stepped forward. He held the golden crown in his hands as he approached Robb. But there was something in his stride, something in the way one hand cradled the crown and the other supported it, something in his posture. Catelyn felt chills go up her spine. And then she realized what it was and went white. "Robb!" She screamed, and her horse bucked at the sudden noise. Catelyn only barely held on. "Robb, watch out!" Robb turned to look at her. The sudden, jerking motion pulled him away from Joffrey, enough that the dagger meant for his ribs only grazed his arm. His cry of pain was drowned by Grey Wind's howl, and Catelyn lost sight of him once more as the horses surrounding her panicked. By the time they calmed down, Joffrey lay on the ground with half his neck cut open. The other knights were shrinking away from Grey Wind. Tyrion Lannister's face was spattered with his nephew's blood. Even from this distance, Catelyn could see his agitation. Robb's sword was unsheathed, and it shone in the early afternoon sun. Red blood dripped, staining the grass. "Is there anyone else who wants a try?" he demanded. "Any other honorless knight who wants to die today?" "Come on, I've no desire to rule over a kingdom of traitors." "'Twas Joffrey's own decision to do this," Tyrion said quickly. "None other knew of it. Not me, not any of the men. I beg of you, Lord Robb." "King," Robb snarled. "King Robb, then. You have no others who would raise steel against you. Not here." Robb stared at him for a long moment, and Catelyn could see the temper burning through his spine. "They tried to kill you," she thought, and wished for just a single moment that he would hold to the terms he'd laid out to King's Landing 3 days previous, that he would give the order and they could spill enough Lannister blood on these fields that the Westerlands never recovered. But her son, her honorable, merciful, valiant son, he only sheathed his sword. He only sheathed his sword, raised his chin, and acted as if he hadn't given these men another chance at life. "I razed the Westerlands to the ground," he said. "I burnt Lannisport and starved Casterly Rock, and I've the outright support of half the kingdoms even without the Iron Throne. The next man to raise a sword to me and mine will be fed to my direwolf. Do you understand?" Catelyn let her breath gust out of her abruptly. "Oh, my boy," she thought. "Oh, I've never been so proud of you." They marched into King's Landing. As they entered the throne room, a maid came from another part of the keep. "My lord," she gasped. "The queen, the Lady Cersei, when she heard of her son's death, she threw herself out of a window." "What?" Robb asked, reeling. "When?" "Not a few minutes previous." She hesitated. We tried to stop her, but she right near ripped off Sharice's ear, and we couldn't stop her. His mother wrapped a hand over his shoulder. Put a guard over the others, she ordered. Ensure nothing like this happens again. Once the maid left, she turned to Robb. So Joffrey and Cersei Lannister are dead, she said. We hold King's Landing. What now? Now? Robb asked. Now the hard part begins. Now, he said, swallowing, we melt down the Iron Throne. She startled. Robb. He frowned. Sansa didn't tell you our plans? No, his mother said quietly. She didn't. Ah. Well, it starts here. We are Northerners, Mother. My army is loyal to me because they think me worthy of this crown, not because they fear what I can do to them. Robb grinned at her. And of course, I don't want to sit on something so pointy. You know how bloody my back's going to be if I'm not careful? Suddenly, she reached out and embraced him, tight as Sansa before she left Winterfell the first time, tight as Sansa when she came back. I am so proud of you, she told him fiercely. You've done so well, Robb. Your father would be proud if he were here to see you. Well, he said, pulling away after a moment, this isn't over yet. No, it isn't. Her lips twisted wryly. You need someone with both intelligence and loyalty to navigate this court, Robb. I can help, but not when I don't know precisely what is needed for you. What are you saying? I'm saying that you need Sansa. God save us. Jon looked out into the fields. Well? I don't want to, Sansa replied. They were huddled together on the ledge Sansa had slept on the night before Peter's death. The wind wasn't as cold during the day, and with someone else beside her, it wasn't even uncomfortable. They'd received Robb's raven just that morning. But you will, he said. Will I? Sansa, said Jon half impatiently. We've planned this for 7 years. And anyhow, you're not one to let fear stop you from acting, or you'd have surrendered at Last Hearth. So when are we leaving? She sighed. I want some of the women from Last Hearth to come with me. At least Alice, Mira, Willa, and Eddard'd be of great help. The more that can come, the better, in all honesty, and what I'm aiming to do is controversial enough that I want some allies beside me. Robb isn't enough? Robb, she said, is miserable at politics. Jon laughed. Sansa continued earnestly. He is. He'd think the ones who hate him the most are his allies, the ones who are actually loyal are the traitors, and he manages to alienate them all in the space of a week. If anything, I should lock him up in his bedchamber. It'd save me a lot of trouble. I'd like to see that, Jon murmured, wrapping his arms around her and dragging her close. Sansa shifted so that she lay half on him and threaded her fingers through his curls. So we'll leave in a little over a fortnight. I look forward to it, he said, and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Liar, Sansa replied without heat and let her eyes drift closed lazily. 7 ravens left King's Landing one morning, each carrying an utterly important summons, each heading to a different keep. When Sansa finally arrived at King's Landing, Robb threw himself at her. I was so worried, he mumbled into her neck. Gods, I hadn't so much as considered, well, I thought for sure we were damned to the high heavens, and then you sent that bloody raven, and I didn't stop smiling for just about a week. Sansa hugged him back just as tightly. I know, I missed you so much. It's been an entire year. The crown looks good on you. You've grown so thin. Gods, he said again, and his hug tightened impossibly. Sansa breathed deep and let herself dangle in his arms for a moment longer before pulling away. She was close to many people, and she loved them all. But Robb was different. He was the first one she'd ever trusted, and he was her closest brother, and they'd spent just as much time arguing and fighting as they did laughing, for so many years. When she'd first left him, it had felt like a lost limb to not have him there for sharp comments and easy laughter. When next he'd left her, it had felt even worse. "Where's Mother?" Sansa asked. Once the initial introductions were over, Robb had pounded Jon on his back, and her council had looked both flattered and impressed at Robb's manners when he greeted them. Sansa had already resolved to tease Winifred on her flushed cheeks mercilessly. "Inside the keep." Robb's lips tilted downwards. "The Tyrells arrived yesterday, and they're already making life hell." "Hell's above, there's so much to tell you. I can't wait to talk to you about everything." Sansa glanced at Jon and felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. "You've no idea," she replied, and let herself be shuffled into the keep. Robb was exhausted before they'd so much as finished half the things that needed to be covered. Sansa had brought the Kingslayer with her, and preparing a cell for him, along with all the other Lannister hostages, had been tiring. Then their mother, Sansa's council, and Sansa herself had spent hours deciding which rooms would be given to whom after they arrived. After that, she'd started talking to Robb about the rise and wildling invasions in the north, and what they had to do about it. He was impressed with her stamina. "Anything else?" he asked when they'd finally managed to go over everything. Sansa hesitated, glancing at her council and then back to him. "Yes," she said, "though it might be better to do it in private." Robb shrugged. "Me and you, or—" "It might be better to have Mother here as well." Her lips quirked in a mirthless smile. "But maybe not Jon." Robb frowned, confused, but only said, "You heard her," to the council. Some of them left quickly, but others looked amused as they did so. Jon cast a worried look back at Sansa as he followed them out. He avoided Robb's gaze with as much unsubtle awkwardness as he'd been doing since they arrived. "I'll talk it over tomorrow at the practice grounds. Best thing for it, I can hit him over the head if he gets as brooding as before." When the door clicked shut, he nodded to Sansa. "Something important?" "Yes." She breathed deep, looking down into her lap. Slowly she lifted her head and met Robb's gaze. I'm married." "I didn't hear that correctly?" Robb felt his brows pull together. "You what?" She shifted uneasily, and her eyes dipped away quickly before coming back to meet Robb's decisively. Suddenly, he realized that she was avoiding their mother's gaze more than she was trying to meet his own. "I got married," Sansa repeated. "When?" their mother asked crisply. Her shoulders pulled tight, defensive. A few months ago." "To whom?" "I think it might be a better idea if I ensure that you didn't kill him first," she said, voice high and nervous. "I rather." "Months ago," Robb said slowly. "Why didn't you tell us, Sansa?" She inhaled and lifted her chin. "Because you wouldn't approve." "And knowing that, you still went ahead with it?" Sansa looked between them. "I wanted to tell you in person, at first, and by the time I realized how foolish that was, it seemed more prudent to wait than to send you a raven. That's why I asked Father and the others not to tell you." She shook her head. "I know it was terribly foolish of me, not to mention selfish, but I do love him. He's always been kind to me, and—" Their mother leaned forward, eyes glittering like the palest stars. "Who?" she asked, cold and frozen as the oldest tides. "Is he?" "Promise me you won't hurt him," Sansa replied, turning to look at Robb. When he shook his head, she straightened and said firmly, "If you won't give your word, I won't tell you. Promise, and I'll speak." "You're 16, Robb exclaimed. "A woman grown," she flared back. "A woman grown would not act as impetuously as you did," their mother said, and Sansa deflated slightly, just enough for him to see the tears behind her defiance. Robb muttered a curse under his breath, and glared at her. "Fine. Fine, have your bloody promise. I won't hurt the man you've chosen to spend a life with." I hope he's worth it, Sansa, because I don't know if I can admire a man who hides behind your skirts. He's just doing what I asked, she said acidly, and then visibly bit her tongue. I'm sorry. Thank you, Rob. Answer the question, he ordered. He could see her impulse. She wanted to toss her head and shout back, but also her restraint. She swallowed it all down and sent him a weak smile instead. I married John, she said quietly. John? Rob asked dumbly, at the same time as his mother forced her chair back so it screeched against the flagstones. John who? John, our cousin, Sansa said. John, the man you legitimized as a Targaryen. I mean, now he's a Stark, but before that he was. You married our brother? Rob asked, horrified. I married our cousin, she corrected, voice stinging. I love him, Rob, as I didn't think myself capable. He swallowed hard, and their mother turned towards them. This was extremely stupid of you, she told Sansa. I'm surprised your father supported you at all. You had such great chances, Sansa, and you squandered them on a man who has already promised to our... What great chances, Mother? She asked. I am already queen. I already have power and all the wealth I can ever want. All I wish for is a man who loves me and treats me with kindness and respect, and John does that in droves. Their mother sighed. I want you to be happy, of course I do. But what does John know of ruling? Of the dangers and tribulations that come from that? He will rule beside me, Sansa replied. It isn't as if I have much knowledge myself. We shall learn together, if necessary. And your past life? The one in which you feared yourself broken? She shook her head. Men have hurt you. Why not wait and see? Because we all might die, said Sansa. Because there aren't enough days in this life to waste. I was hurt, Mother, and I'm not saying I wasn't. But there is a difference between John and those men, and he will never treat me as they did, and that is half the reason why I trust him. Rob arched an eyebrow. The other half being? The other half being that he's as honorable as father, and twice as kind, she snapped back. Oh, and also let's not forget that he's much better in bed than the others, why don't we? Well, that is enlightening, to say the least. Sansa, their mother reproved, and Rob watched in amusement as she flushed a red bright enough to be painful. I'm not asking for permission or forgiveness, Sansa ground out. I am telling you because you deserve to know. I hope you can find it in yourself to accept my decision, but this is final, whether or not you do. Damn it all. Sansa. Good day, Mother Rob. She curtsied slightly and strode out of the room. Your mother is scary, Jon murmured. Sansa, in the middle of undoing her braid, closed her eyes in what looked to be absolute mortification. I got Rob to promise, she said. Not Mother. Gods, Jon, I'm sorry. They're being rather unhelpful about this whole thing, you know, and, well, what did she say to you? He rolled fully onto the bed so he was staring up at the canopy. That if I ever raised so much as a finger to you, she'd ensure that I'd beg for mercy before I died. The actual words had been, hurt worse than the Lord Royce Bolton flayed alive, but Jon rather thought that Sansa didn't need to know the entirety of her mother's imagination. Well, Sansa said, I've no words, Jon. Mother's always been protective of me, and it doesn't look like she'll stop anytime soon. He propped himself on his elbow, watching her, and her eyes met his in the looking glass. I am sorry for what it's worth. If I do hurt you, said Jon, I'm sure I'll deserve everything your mother does to me. Sansa sighed playfully. If you hurt me, I'll be handling it myself. We Starks don't turn our faces, Jon, don't you remember? I remember, he replied. I just think your mother isn't half as scary as you, and so would prefer to be handled by her. How wonderful, she said, and got up from the vanity, coming closer to him. I'm glad I frightened you. You frighten me, he agreed, because you're so beautiful, and I can't seem to stop myself from doing everything to you despite being married for almost half a year already. So sweet, she exclaimed, high enough to make him wince, but then she kissed him, and Jon fell back onto the cushions, and there was little enough talk for the rest of the day. Robb received a raven the next morning from their father. He asked me to return, he told Sansa and their mother over breakfast. Jon had apparently declined to attend. The wildling attacks have gotten too serious. He wants the army back in the north. And the urgency has nothing to do with the fact that you hate the south, said Sansa. It's too hot, Robb declared. I've no idea how you lived here for so long, Sansa. I can scarce sleep at night. I swear there's no air to breathe. Perhaps you ought to stop dressing in such heavy furs, their mother murmured, and Robb exhaled loudly, impatiently. Sansa laughed. Fine. But even if you go back, I have to stay here. Aye, he said slowly. I'll need an army, Sansa reminded him. We're inviting too many soldiers. If there's a chance, they'll take advantage. We need to have the upper hand as long as they remain here. Edmure ought to be riding here, their mother commented. Have him bring his army. Is it big enough? More than, Robb reassured her. Then, lips quirking, Mother, what about you? She turned to Sansa. Will you need me here? Yes, Sansa said plainly, then hesitated. Though I'd understand if you want to go home with Robb. Rickon misses you like you wouldn't believe. You need me, their mother said calmly. Her eyes crinkled in a smile. My queen needs me. What mother could deny that? Sansa swallowed, staring into her cup as if it held the secrets of the universe. Slowly, she looked up at them both and flashed her teeth in a genuine smile. I'll be finishing this as quickly as possible, she told him. We should all be back in Winterfell soon. Definitely, said Robb, and whatever anger was between the two of them faded as if it never existed. Robb left the morning after their uncle came from Riverrun. Sansa hugged him tightly, told him to keep safe, and then shoved him towards Jon, whom he hadn't spoken to since his arrival at King's Landing. Go on, she said, and turned away. Robb breathed deep and approached Jon, careful and wary as he'd never before even considered. There was something fragile between them, now, a mistrust that sank into every look, every breath, every thought. Sansa was Robb's sister, and she pushed and prodded until he gave in exasperatedly. Robb had forgiven her for her silence quicker than he'd expected, but Jon had only accepted Robb's silent anger, and he'd done so with an ease that made something hot and hard curl up in Robb's belly. At any other time, Robb might have continued to hold on to it, but there was another war brewing up north, another kingdom that he had to defend. He knew better than to let this fester for any longer than necessary. Stay alive, he said finally, after a long pause. Jon nodded. You too. After a moment, Robb could stand the tense silence no longer. He turned and grabbed Jon's shoulder. If you ever do something like that again, he said lowly, I don't know what. But you'll regret it. It doesn't matter to me who your parents were. You're my brother. And you don't get to keep quiet on things this important, Jon. Gods, just imagine. Imagine Bran going and finding a wife without whispering a single word of it to anyone. You don't get to act less? Do you understand? You're my brother, and anyone who says otherwise will get a sword blade to their throat. Next time you take this important a decision, you tell me. Jon blinked and looked away and then looked back, just as steady as Sansa at her sharpest, just as steady as Arya at her fiercest. All right, he said, and if the edges cracked, if it was hoarse, Robb ignored it. Into Robb's ears, as they embraced, he whispered, It was me who wanted to keep quiet about it. Not Sansa. She was ready to send ravens, but I asked her not to. I was afraid. Robb stepped back and chewed over that for a moment before sighing. Why were you afraid? I what? Why were you afraid? Robb repeated. Because you were afraid of our reactions? Because you didn't think we'd approve? Why didn't you want to tell us? Jon ducked his head, and for all that he was taller than Robb, for all that he was older, by however many months, Robb felt like he was looking at the brother who clenched his teeth against the world's judgment and glared at everyone who spat the word bastard and still set his sword to the grindstone. Not hesitating for a moment, Robb felt like he was looking at the brother who had always been twice as stubborn as a mule and as foolishly steady, her most Sansa. I didn't want to make it real, he said finally. Sansa, I love her, but I've never been enough. I couldn't save her, not when we went south the first time, not when she was in the north the second. Sansa saved herself, and I'll always be glad for that, but I wasn't there. He inhaled shallowly. I am just as honorless as the Kingslayer. Back up, Robb said firmly. There's a difference between not having the chance to fulfill your vows and actively breaking them. And you did save Sansa that last time. You did the best you could in a situation where you couldn't win. He wrinkled his nose. Also, tell Sansa how you feel. She's much better at the whole inspirational thing. Jon smothered a laugh in his sleeve. And what are you good at then? Compared to Sansa? Robb rolled his eyes. Nothing. She was always the perfect one. Everyone else just looks foolish next to her, He felt his lips twitch as a sudden thought occurred to him. In point of fact, I feel rather bad for you, stuck beside a woman who makes you look as sophisticated as a horse's ass for the rest of your life. Gods, I can hardly think of a worse fate. Jon retorted, but at least I've got some sophistication, don't I? Meanwhile, you're so afraid of comparison you're running away before anyone actually gets their head on straight and realizes how much better Sansa is at everything. And he dodged Robb's punch, speaking through the laughter that was threatening to swallow his words. And you're taking your bloody army with you, because they'll turn around and bend the knee to her. I'll rip your head off, Robb snarled and lunged forward. Boys, murmured Winifred, but a smile curled over her lips. Alice grinned. 10 copper stars that the king wins. Are you joking? Willa tossed her hair. Sansa's husband has muscles. Or am I the only one who's been peeking during the bathing sessions on the road? Willa, Winifred hissed. Willa rolled her eyes. You were almost worse than me. Going after that tall-haired boy like he makes the sun rise every morning, good mother. You can do better, win. Willa, Winifred hissed again. Fine, said Willa, and then turned, ignoring her sister entirely. She nodded to Alice. I'll take you up on that bet. 10 stars on Jon Stark to win this. Agreed, said Alice. Once Winifred huffed and left them to go and talk to Adira, who was at least not so blatantly scandalous, she leaned in towards Willa and said, You weren't alone in the looking, if you were wondering. Willa arched a gleeful eyebrow, and Alice shook her head. Not me, I've got more class than that, but you should have seen Adira. No, Willa said aghast. She wouldn't. She did. Alice grinned again, smugly. And I'm fairly certain something might happen soon, if you haven't already. It isn't like he's ugly, and it is rather understandable. I'll give you a full bag if you can guess who. Ladies don't gamble, Willa replied haughtily, flicking a loose strand of hair away from her eyes. After Jon had wrestled Robb down into the earth and the army had left and Alice had paid Willa her coins, she looped an arm around Alice and dragged her away from the crowd. Make it a bag of stags, Willa said, and you've got yourself a deal. Sansa sat on a hastily made throne with Jon beside her. They'd been doing this since morning, and it was just as irritating as it was boring. Jon had begun the day sitting beside her, and as time went on, he'd gone from sitting to standing in a vain attempt to alleviate the utter dullness of it all. Lord Tyrion wishes to address Her Majesty, said the crier, and Sansa felt a slow prickle of interest. Tyrion had been confined to his rooms since surrendering King's Landing to Robb. This audience likely represented the first time he'd left them in nearly a month. Tyrion entered the rooms and knelt. "Your Grace." "Rise," said Sansa. "Speak, Lord Tyrion. What do you wish to know?" "When I knelt to your brother," Tyrion said quietly, "I was told he would be merciful." He hesitated. "They call you the Merciful Queen, don't they?" "They do." "Then why?" he broke off, and then continued. "I haven't seen my brother yet, Your Grace. But there are rumors, and some say that." Jon sent Sansa a meaningful look, and she leaned back and let him take over. "That he no longer has both hands," finished Jon. Tyrion rocked back on his feet. "It's true then?" "Aye," Jon said evenly. "It is. They say you don't torture your prisoners." "We don't. But when a man attempts to escape, when a man of the Kingslayer's skill attempts to escape, there are consequences." Jon sighed. When he heard of his twin's death, he went berserk. That night, he tried to escape and failed in killing one of the Karstarks only by sheer happenstance. The next night, he procured a glass shard from where we do not know and succeeded in killing one of his own bannermen before one of our direwolves stopped him. "We attempted to reason with him," Sansa explained, "but he refused to let go of that glass piece and started trying to claw at his own neck. One of our direwolves bit off his hand when he wouldn't let go." Tyrion looked weary, Sansa thought. Weary and too tired to even profess shock over his brother's apparent madness. "Once the negotiations are done," she said gently, "you can meet with him. I'm sorry that we've had to confine you from both the Kingslayer and your nieces and nephews, but it was necessary." "Negotiations for what?" he asked, confused. Jon arched an eyebrow. "They've not told you?" "I have little enough information in my cell," Tyrion said, and it was half defiant, half exhausted. "A pretty comfortable cell, Your Grace, but a cell all the same." "I am not your sister," Sansa replied soberly. "The truth does not frighten me. No, my lord, the truth is this: none of my siblings has any desire to sit on the Iron Throne. This kind of power is too much for any man to bear. It makes them go mad. Westeros was bound together by fear of dragons and fire, but the dragons are gone now, and so we shall split the continent back into its constituent kingdoms." Jon sent her a quick smile. 8 kingdoms, my lord. And of these 8, the Westerlands are one, and there is only one man I see who has the blood right to it." Tyrion blinked quickly before giving a short bark of laughter. "You intend to put me as ruler? Those lords would dethrone me within a moon's turn." Sansa's lips twitched. "I could place a goat as head of the Westerlands, and there wouldn't be a revolt for at least a half-decade," she told him. "The land has been burned, Lord Tyrion. My brother has razed it to the ground. And if you're smart, as I know you to be, you'll consolidate your own power in those 5 years of leeway that you have. Though I rather hope you'll be better than a goat when you sit on a throne." "And what of Myrcella and Tommen?" "Their fate remains undecided." Sansa held up a hand at his protests. "They won't be mistreated, my lord. That much I can and will assure you. But sometimes marriages must be made, and if they are willing to the match, only then will their fate not lie in your hands. If there are to be no marriages, then we shall leave their guardianship to you. And of course, once the negotiations are finished, you shall take your brother home with you." Jon nodded. "'Tis a good deal, my lord. I'd strongly suggest you take it. It's kinder than any other would have offered." The same words the Kingslayer said to me at last, Hearth. My, how the tables have turned. "I will think on it," said Tyrion, and bowed and left. Sansa sighed, once the throne room was empty, spine bowing a little. Jon sent her a commiserating expression, and she rolled her eyes before calling, "Send the next in." Robb left the morning that Uncle Edmure came. And after that, the others arrived. The Lannisters were already there, and so were the Dialux. But Bronn's young Royce came, escorting sweet Robin. Asha Greyjoy arrived with 50 longships and a stack of letters for her brother. The last of the Tyrells finally arrived from Highgarden. Davos Seaworth, accompanied by Shireen Baratheon, as dour and kind as ever. And finally, Oberyn Martell landed with a coterie of other Martells surrounding him like satyrs or snakes, Sansa thought, and rose to greet them. Asha watched the Queen carefully. Sansa Stark had proven to have more teeth than anyone could have predicted. The old courtiers had heard King Rob's decision to place the full responsibility of breaking Westeros apart on her shoulders, and they'd laughed. The retiring girl who'd scarcely stepped out of her rooms in the keep would have to rule the entire continent? She'll either let someone rule in her name, one of them had told Asha, or she'll start crying on her first day. But she hadn't. Sansa had welcomed Asha's 50 longships with a smile that showed nothing but rehearsed, placid warmth. A show of strength that would have made any warm-blooded Baratheon loyalist quail for certain. The Ironborn rebellion had been at the forefront of everyone's mind when Asha sailed her fleet up the river, which only made the girl smile. The courtier who'd assured Asha of Sansa's docility looked rather cowed, in fact, when Asha finally saw him in the Red Keep. A wolf, thought Asha, amused. So you've decided to show your teeth, have you? Little matter. Everyone knows krakens are rather more dangerous than pale-toothed wolves, no matter how much you sharpen your claws. 2 days later, she stretched out her legs in the council room and watched Sansa carefully, all the while looking as disinterested as she could. I am glad you came, Sansa said, that same practiced smile on her face. When the ruler of Westeros calls for you, said Asha, one doesn't dally. I don't precisely see the choice I had, Your Grace. What I meant was that I'm glad you came, Sansa corrected. You are your father's heir, aren't you? Or close enough to make little difference. You do us great honor with your presence. Do I? Asha drawled. Well, for all that I was raised to be my father's heir, I've little enough support for the crown. I'm no heir. Then who is? My uncles. It's happened before. When a man has no male-born heirs, his brothers take control. She shrugged. And, of course, we determine our leaders in our king's moot. You've no power even if you wished it. I don't want power, Sansa replied, voice still as even as it had been at the beginning of the conversation. Asha wondered what would break her composure. No. Tell me, Lady Asha, would you be amenable to taking the crown? Leave behind the fact that you think it is unlikely. Would you wish to? I know of no Greyjoy who wouldn't, Asha said flatly, though I see little point in this conversation. The coffers are empty, she said suddenly. The treasury kept under King Robert has been depleted almost entirely, but there are still things in it that were worthless to gold diggers. Things that were overlooked, if you understand what I mean. Asha's eyes narrowed. I don't. No? Sansa arched an eyebrow. Have you forgotten so quickly of the Naga crown? They were only another of the things lost in my father's ill-fated rebellion, Asha said slowly. It was used before the Driftwood crown to signify the ruler of the Ironborn. Are you offering them back, Your Grace? Sansa looked at her steadily, albeit a bit confusedly, and then sighed. There has been news from Pike, my lady, she said carefully. I thought you were aware of it. You've certainly not been isolated from ravens since your arrival. Though looking at you now, I'm fairly certain you've no idea of what has happened. If you did something, I'll gut you like a fish and damn the consequences. What are you talking about? Asha asked warily. Your father suffers from a draining disease, Sansa said quietly. I'm not sure what it is, only that it is there. It is why I called you here. To talk over it. My father is ill, Asha said, bowing her head. There was a faint ringing in her ears. Asha breathed in, shallow and open mouthed. She breathed out and then raised her chin and met Sansa's gaze as steadily as Sansa had ever done. I will have to leave for Pike, she announced. And you shall. Sansa leaned forward. You shall go to your home with the Naga crown, and you shall reign as ruler. You're offering me the crown freely? Asha asked incredulously. I am offering you the crown on one condition, Sansa replied. Of fucking course. That you become Queen of the Iron Islands. What? You heard me. Sansa stepped forward, eyes shining like twin stars. In that moment, Asha could see the bone-deep strength running inside this girl, the self-same strength that had inspired a castle of women to take up arms, the strength that had guided her brother to name her a queen in her own right, the strength that had led her to break apart a kingdom that was 3 centuries hewn together. You heard me. I do not want your uncles to become driftwood kings. Who will stand against a woman who holds the strength of the Hollows? Who is the rightful heir of Balon Greyjoy, who calls a king smoot and claims the sea-stone chair wearing the Naga crown? And what do you want in return? Asha demanded, eyes hard. In return for the crown, what do you want me to do? I warn you, I will not sacrifice my people's pride for yours. You wouldn't be a good ruler if you did. No, what I want is something smaller. In a few years, after you've settled your kingdom, all I want is for you to provide me with an audience. She raised an eyebrow. The contract's been written if you wish to read it. Asha pursed her lips. Let me see it. Sansa nodded and reached for a paper amongst the stack on the table. Asha took it and read it, every line. There'd been a good-looking sailor in Fair Isle who'd been a shark for the contract, and Ishad nearly signed her ship and herself away with her carelessness. She'd stuck him with a dirk and sailed away quickly, but she'd learned her lesson. Contracts were important. You just want an audience, Asha stated when she'd finished reading. You're giving back the Naga crown, you're handing me a throne, and all you want is an audience. She tossed the contract onto the table and folded her arms over her chest. Tell me, Queen Sansa, are you as much of a fool as people call you? Sansa blinked. Her lips twitched slightly, but in the end she settled for looking politely confused. Are there people calling me a fool? Not the point. Asha felt her nails bite into the flesh of her upper arm. Why give me so much? And speak plainly, I've no patience for avoidance. If I told you, you wouldn't believe me. Sansa smiled tiredly. The major reason, at least, is something I won't tell you. But there are others. You won't bring raiders to the shores of the other kingdoms as your Uncle Euron would. The Tyrells are rather taken with you, so there's little opposition from them to naming you as queen. And Theon thinks you'd be good at it. Does he? Asha asked, truly curious. Sansa nodded. He didn't say as much, of course. But when Robb asked, Theon said that your uncles weren't the most level-headed persons. Being the least evil of 3 potential rulers is no compliment, Asha said wryly. Less so when the ones being compared are Victarion and Euron Greyjoy. Perhaps, Sansa sighed. So, to answer your question, yes. I wish for you to welcome me, or a representative coming in my name, to your court. I want a private conference with you, one that will be granted without delay. And that is the only condition I am placing before I give you the Naga crown. Asha rocked backwards, reached for the contract, skimmed it again, swallowed through a dry throat, and then nodded. All right, she said. I'll sign it. On the way from their second meeting with the Stormlords and towards their fourth with the Tyrells, Willa caught Alice's attention and gestured for her to step away from the crowd. When Alice slipped into a small alcove, Willa followed. Is it Serwyn? She asked. Alice arched an eyebrow. Give Adara some credit, Willa. She has taste at least. Willa rolled her eyes. A moment later, black and gold colors flashed away from the door and she grinned. You've heard the news, I take it? That the Queen's got her first challenge under her belt? Alice nodded. She was rather worried that the other potential rulers, meaning of course the Tyrells, wouldn't agree to Asha Greyjoy. but the Tyrells were rather happy about it when I spoke to them today morning. Well, that's fine too, but I was talking about why the Tyrells are so agreeable to her. Wella grinned and jogged Alice's elbow. Besides the fact that Asha's foreign policy is entirely at odds with her uncle's, meaning no raiding on Tyrell grounds? She asked dryly. I couldn't think of any reason for them to support her, Willa. Absolutely none, I tell you. Don't be mean. Willa pouted, but quickly shook it off. No, well, that might have been important too. But turns out her biggest supporter amidst the Tyrells is Marjorie. Alice blinked. Marjorie, the daughter of Mace Tyrell? That's the one. Marjorie, the widow of Renly Baratheon? That Marjorie? Yes. And is she just a supporter, or is it more? Willa grinned at her. Take a guess. Good gods, Alice breathed. Well, this changes things, doesn't it? Does it? Marjorie Tyrell and Asha Greyjoy. Alice gestured pointedly, heatedly. Do you really not see what can come of an Ironborn Reach alliance? Willa drew up short, jaw snapping shut with a decisive click. I didn't. You're a fool, Alice told her, and Willa didn't bother saying anything. Does the Queen know? I'll tell her. Willa turned and started towards the door before glancing back at her. Do you know where she is? Still with the Stormlords, I think, said Alice. She paused again, a bare hesitation, before adding, Tell her what Lord Errol told us after the meeting, all right? Willa remembered Lord Errol and suppressed a wince. He had eyes the same color as the blue of the white knife in the hours before the river froze over, and his skin was as colorless as the ice that collected on its banks. Her leg always ached when she had to speak to him, as if in warning. He'd approached them after their last meeting with the Stormlords, in which Sansa had finally announced that she wished to support Shireen Baratheon's claim to the Storm Throne. If you give that cursed girl a crown, he said, she'll not make it to another name day. Sansa can't do anything about that, Willa pointed out. Alice rolled her shoulders and sighed. Not just Errol's threat. I forgot. It was Adira who was with me when I spoke to her. Well, I spoke to Lady Shireen last night, and she's saying she doesn't want the throne, which is slightly more difficult to answer than any singular threat. Fucking hell, Willa muttered, and spun towards the door before turning back again. Don't take Adara next time you want to talk to anyone below the age of 15. She tends to scare most of them silly because... She has no expression? Alice sighed again. I saw it yesterday. She made things so much more uncomfortable than necessary. I think Lady Shireen cried after we left. Though I think Adara does that to everyone, not just people below 15. I'm only willing to protect people that young, Willa retorted. Anyone older can fend for themselves. She scrubbed a hand down her face, allowing herself a moment of indulgence before straightening. All right. Good luck with the Tyrells. I'll meet you there. Of course, said Alice, and they parted ways easily. Can we talk, my lady? Shireen Baratheon blinked up at Sansa for a moment before she nodded slowly. Her dark hair was braided tightly along the unscarred part of her face, but the other half was shadowed with strands of hair that must have been purposely teased out in a vain attempt to cover the scars. Sansa's heart went out to her. Shireen was younger than Sansa had been when the Lannisters came to Winterfell, and she was having a crown placed on her head forcibly. But Shireen was the last true-born Baratheon, and that meant something. I thought we could go for a walk, Sansa told her. It's a beautiful day, and I'd very much like to speak to you in private, my lady. After they'd left their companions behind, along with Shireen's glaring mother, Sansa looped her arm around Shireen's and steered her to a small stone bench set in a corner of the garden. I think I owe you an apology, Sansa told her solemnly, once they'd both sat down. I'm placing a crown on your head, my lady. And a crown takes away freedom as much as it gives you power, and I'm not giving you a choice in taking it. I am truly sorry for that. Are you? Shireen asked quietly. She looked away, but then her eyes flashed back to Sansa's, and for all her quiet demureness, there was a hard light in them. Did you hear what Lord Aerys said? He told Ser Trant that he'd kill me. And the lords you're naming my bannermen, they all hate me. If you put that crown on my head, I won't survive a year in Storm's End. I am not placing a golden circlet on your head and walking away, said Sansa, gentle as she knew how. And you're not without friends, Lady Shireen. Lord Penrose rather likes you, and Lords Selmy, Tarth, and Dindarian have all expressed their support of your reign. I won't let you die. Have no fear of that, at least. Should I not? She leaned back, brushing away the strands of hair curling against her stone-cracked cheek impatiently. Let's say I'm not killed, Your Grace. Then what? Do you think that my bannermen will serve a woman? Even if they might have done that, do you think they'll serve a young one? And even if they do that, do you think they'll serve me? The grayscale-ridden daughter of a religious fanatic? That wasn't your father, Sansa said softly. Or perhaps not all your father was. Her lips twisted dryly. And I'm not running away as soon as I crown you. No, you're young Lady Shireen, I agree. But it's past time the lords of Westeros learn that their wives and daughters are no fainting dolls to be controlled. We've the strength to lead, to envision, to spend a lifetime in the shadows and not be broken. And who better to rule the Stormlands for the first time in 3 centuries than another Storm Queen? They stripped the last one of her clothes and her dignity, Shireen pointed out. And Nargilla Durrendon retained her life and honor, Sansa said. She bore a son whom you are a direct descendant of. Shireen, trust me. Your bannermen will not speak or rise against you, not for another 5 years. I'll give you that time to become a queen they respect, a queen they will follow. Think of it as a gift from one queen to another. Shireen breathed in slowly, and then suddenly took the hair hanging over her cheek and pulled it back. Look at me, she said. When Sansa focused on her eyes, she impatiently waved at her cheek. No, Your Grace, look at me. I am. Are you? Are you seeing what I am? My mother sees me and thinks me a failure. Davos sees me and pities me. What do you see that you think I can bear to become a Storm Queen? Sansa kept her eyes wide open, her face honest. She knew what it did to girls when the world saw only one part of them and called it the sum of their worth. She knew how brave Shireen had to be to so much as hint at her scars in front of Sansa. She knew how it felt to be on the other side of this encounter, and she knew how to answer this. I see a Baratheon, Sansa said lowly. The last true-born Baratheon in the world. A girl who is scarred and wounded. She reached out and gently, carefully, brushed the strands away from Shireen's face, cupped her cheek. A girl who dares the world to be unkind despite knowing its darkness. A girl who has convinced 4 proud, defiant Stormlords to bend the knee without even trying. Quietly, delicately, she leaned forward until she was close enough that Shireen had no choice but to see the truth in her eyes. A worthy heir to Argilla Dorndan and your own father. I see your scars, Lady Shireen, and I tell you this, they are no measure of your ability to bear a crown. Shireen swallowed. I don't want it, she whispered finally. Sansa sighed. Neither do I, she said. Neither does my brother. By the end of it, I'm quite sure your Uncle Robert didn't either. Nobody with any sense wants a crown, my lady, though there are always people who will kill to get it. But for good or ill, you are the last Baratheon and so the last heir to the Stormlands, and I know that you will be a good queen. How? Because, Sansa said levelly, you've your father's sense of justice and King Robert's strength and King Renly's kindness. Because you are the best of them. Shireen was pale and small, a dark-haired little shadow watching Sansa with big, blue eyes. The shape was wrong, the shade was wrong, but for a heartbeat, Bran stared up at Sansa and Shireen's thin-boned face, asking quietly, worriedly, about how to prove himself worthy. Sansa swallowed and watched Shireen's shoulders curl inwards before she remembered herself, and then the way she simply proudly, straightened her back, and looked up at Sansa. For just a moment, Sansa could see her uncle in her, the bright-eyed, brilliant heir to the proudest realm of Westeros. The daughter of the just, the niece of the kind and the fierce, the true-blooded descendant of the wind and sea and storm. You do not need a crown, thought Sansa. I am not giving you anything. I am only uncovering what will happen in the end. They rose and walked out of the garden, back to Shireen's mother and her lords, back to Sansa's ladies. They didn't speak anything more. There was nothing more to be said, Sansa thought. In the end, they were the daughters of stern, noble fathers. They would spend their lives living up to their inheritances. They would be kind and proud and good as they knew how to be, and they would remake the world to be a better place. Years later, decades later, Sansa received a raven from Storm's End. Shireen had wed by then, and her Storm Lords had bent the knee. Sansa hadn't seen her since speaking to her in King's Landing. "Thank you," the letter said. "Thank you for believing in me." That was it, no more. Not a signature, nothing to suggest who'd written it, save for the seal. But Sansa knew, and it was more than enough. Everything was interlocked. Sansa had spent hours throwing out ideas with her ladies on the way to King's Landing. They'd settled on likely bribes, easy offers, and absolute deal-breakers. But none of them had been ready for the sheer complexity of the whole thing. Asha Greyjoy could be bribed into becoming queen easily enough. All she needed was the Naga crown, which served no purpose by languishing in the treasury anyhow. And Theon rather thought she wanted it in the first place, which made things easier. Her relationship with Marjorie had come as a surprise to Sansa, though not a bad one. With her tacit support of it, she ensured that relations between the Reach and the Iron Islands remained neutral, at least even if they weren't positive yet. But the Reach Ironborn alliance discomforted her uncle Edmure. It was too easy for them to sweep in and make the Riverlands another battleground, after all. He'd started speaking to the Vale soldiers, and by the end of 2 days, Bronze Yone had announced that they would establish the same tariffs as Dorne, and not a single penny less. It had taken Sansa hours of negotiation to ensure that the Stormlords didn't follow them in announcing the same. She'd had to give the Riverlands something. They were her kin, and she couldn't let them, who'd faced the brunt of the war, go away empty-handed. In the end, Sansa simply handed control of a vast majority of the Crownlands, which she'd been worrying over the governance anyway, and named it an honor. And despite all this careful maneuvering, despite all the work she'd already accomplished, there was still the matter of Dorne to attend to. The Stormlords were threatened into submission, at least for the moment. The Westermen were happy to maintain what they had, and simply disappear back into their burned fields. The Riverlands were happy with the land they were gaining, but the Dornish had remained ominously quiet through the rest of the negotiations, and Sansa was avoiding speaking to them for as long as she could. Now she sighed and flopped onto the bed. Jon made a slightly disgruntled sound as she jostled him out of his reading, but when he spoke, his tone was only fond. "Long day?" "Long day," she said, voice muffled as she rolled to face him. "Long week. Long year." "I know," he said, bending forwards to press a kiss against her head. "It's been slightly stressful, hasn't it?" "I just want to go back to Winterfell and rest in the pools," she half-wailed. "I'm so sick of the constant talking. People don't even know what they want. They walk into a meeting with me and spend an entire hour telling me why I absolutely have to give them this parcel of land, only to come back a day later and say, "No, thanks, I'd like this one more." That's specific. "Shut up." She shoved at his arm before getting up, turning so he could undo the laces at the back. "I swear to the stranger, Jon, I am going to sick lady on Lord Mallister the next time he calls me just a girl. And the Martells are irritating me already, and I haven't even met with them properly. I'm going to start a war, I just know it." "Just be like Arya," Jon murmured, pressing an open-mouthed kiss to her bare shoulder. "Everything will work out for the better, I know it." By me insulting half our allies? Sansa asked half breathlessly. I don't quite see the plus point there, Jon. All right, insult everyone but the Tullus. You'll still have an army to keep everyone controlled then. You're ridiculous, Sansa told him, and then tugged off the gown. The heat in the south was unbearable, as Robb had said. She wondered how she'd survived all those years the previous time, though then she'd had enough bruises that the heat barely registered. I sparred with some Vale soldiers today, Jon murmured into her hair as she snuggled against his chest. Sounds interesting. I think one of them's impressed enough that he might lend some soldiers to our cause. What? She sat straight up, elbowing him in the gut in the process. Sorry, are you well? Yeah. He winced, shifting slightly, but then grinned at her. But yes, he might. I think it's still up in the air, though. Of course. Sansa waved it away. But you think it might be a possibility. I love you so much, she breathed, leaning forward and pressing a kiss to the corner of his lips. Oh, gods, keep doing that. It'll solve so many issues, you've no idea. He ducked his head, a pleased flush to his cheeks. Sansa had spent her days separated from him, talking with people who hated each other and wanted nothing more than to get some of them. Jon had been at the practice yards and doing the day-to-day ruling. Half the time, they scarcely saw each other in bed, much less during the day. And only 2 days prior, Winifred had turned a very pointed look to Sansa and spent a full half-hour talking about the necessities of admiring a spouse's care and love and easy, unthinking sacrifices. Sansa had been rather confused then, but she thought that she had a better idea of what Winifred had been thinking now. I'll talk to Robert Arryn tomorrow, I think, Jon told her, leaning back against the pillows again. You spoke to Shireen, didn't you? I didn't want to, she grimaced. But it wasn't easy. You're not going to enjoy it. Well, it has to be done. Someone has to tell the boy that they think he can make a good king, and the gods know Bronzeyone's a little too busy for it. Sansa nodded and curled against his chest once more. A moment later, Jon shifted, hand moving and pinching out the candlelight by his bedside. Sansa curled lower instead of rolling for her own, and he grumbled wordlessly before reaching over her shoulder to pinch out the candle on her side. In the darkness, she pressed a kiss to his collarbone and shifted to get comfortable. A moment later, Sansa was asleep. Oberyn leaned back against the cold, hard wooden chairs and glared. He was uncomfortable. He had been uncomfortable for the weeks since he'd arrived in King's Landing. He had been uncomfortable for the decade before that. How Elia had managed to live here for so long. But that was a thought that took him nowhere. It was a thought that only made him angrier. And anger had no place in a conversation with Queen Sansa. As everyone south of the Wall seemed to know, the last noble to shout had been not only dragged out of the keep by her pet direwolf, but also unceremoniously banished from Westeros. At any other time it might have been great gossip. As it was, she announced that Asha Greyjoy would take the Naga crown back to her home the next morning, and everyone forgot the poor nobleman. As it was, Oberyn had spent the past month working his way through the whores of King's Landing, drinking his way through the best wine in the city, and getting a feel for the lay of the land under this new queen. She had a new husband, a stern-eyed young man who was, according to rumor, a Targaryen, a bastard one that had been legitimized by her brother. But the man was so entirely Stark in looks that no one could say one way or another the truth. And he rarely got involved in the whole political scheme. Sansa Stark ran the show with her own hand-picked women, and Lord Jon Stark, he'd taken her name too, spent his hours in the practice yard or helping fix up the buildings or rarely mingling with nobles. What man wants none of the power? And yet, their marriage didn't seem to be unhappy. They slept in the same rooms, and there were no fights heard despite Oberyn installing a separate spy in both their households. It was entirely, sickeningly idyllic. He sighed, and then regretted doing it. The wooden chair made his upper body contract unpleasantly, and Obara hadn't been kind to him when they sparred the previous day, and he wasn't getting any younger. Next time, he'd make sure to get his own cushions from their apartments. Clearly, the new queen had little care for the comfort of her nobility. Thankfully, he had Ilaria and Obara beside him. And of course, then there was Tristane, though Oberyn rather thought he was too quiet these days. Perhaps he'd fought with Arianne recently. Nevertheless, he'd been waiting in these rooms with Ilaria for over an hour, and there was still no sign of the queen's arrival. Oberyn exchanged an impatient look with her before huffing and knocking his head against the back of the chair. A moment later, one of Sansa's ladies entered the room. "The queen wishes to express her apologies for her delay, your grace." She bowed her head. "Her grace suggests that you request more refreshments until her arrival, if you wish it." "Thank you," Ilaria said before he could speak. He ignored her warning glance as he drawled. One wonders what can hold a queen back for such an extended period of time. Something substantial, hopefully? Ilaria huffed, but he focused on the girl. She didn't flush under his scrutiny, nor did she get flustered. In fact, she only looked slightly amused, though it was well hidden under her dark fringe. "Her Majesty has to attend to various kingdoms, your grace," was all she said. "Kingdoms that are traditional rivals, some that are even enemies. Trying to ensure diplomacy and fairness, it is no easy task." "And the Dornish are forgotten," Oberyn said belligerently. "As always." "Or perhaps she wishes to save the best for last," the girl offered, a smile brightening her face momentarily before she bowed again and slipped out. Ilaria arched an eyebrow appreciatively. "Smart girl." "Yes," Oberyn murmured. "Smart girl indeed." His lips twisted. All those girls were smart Ilaria. In the north, they knew exactly how important they were to the northern resistance. Had they been captured, Robb Stark would have had two options: let them remain hostages and continue on his way, condemning them to death, or surrender arms. His men would never have supported any option but surrendering, she replied, sounding bored. She'd heard this same thread numerous times as Oberyn tried to piece the northern women together. It would have been too barbaric even for them. Just so. The girls saw the same, and they chose not to let their men's war fall apart. It was still a gamble, a horrific one, but good gods, it was a brilliant one. Ilaria tipped her head to the side. "And yet," she said, hardly paying attention, "there are so many here who underestimate Queen Sansa." Those who'd been here under Lannister rule named her a fearful girl, cringing at shadows. The Storm Lords whom Oberyn had managed to get drunk enough to speak couldn't see past her beauty or her soft, gentle demeanor. Her uncle's men thought her a young lady, one too impetuous and impatient to truly succeed. Her own Northerners believed her to be her brother's heir in name as well as truth, and named her the Merciful. Oberyn wasn't sure any longer which was the truth. Perhaps it was all of them. Perhaps it was none of them. But Sansa Stark had saved not only herself, but also her father when she fled the Lannisters. She had, in fact, gone from being their toy to a queen in her own right in less than 5 years. She was young, but she wasn't foolish or naive. Everything that she'd done pointed towards that, but her actions upon coming to King's Landing weren't the same ones she'd done before. Oberyn had read the treaties she offered the Greyjoys, and he'd gaped, who gave away a priceless artifact in return for a single audience. It was the height of idiocy. But she wasn't foolish. Sansa wasn't naive. Then what is she? "She has another game at play," he said, tossing the wineglass onto the table. Ilaria shifted, arching an eyebrow at him again, and Oberyn continued. "She has another goal. Not just keeping each kingdom happy, not just helping the North gain whatever." "Does she?" "Nothing else makes sense." Ilaria pursed her lips, but only nodded. Oberyn sighed and leaned forward, pillowing his head on his arms. So I know exactly one thing before speaking to her, he thought. Whatever else, do not underestimate the queen. Sansa was on her way to speak to the Martells, finally when she received a page who brought her a note bearing her mother's seal. It's absolutely urgent, the note said. Come quickly to my solar, Sansa. She sighed, folded it together and strode in the opposite direction to which she'd been heading. You called, Mother? Lady Catelyn turned and nodded to Sansa when she entered the room. Jon folded his arms over his chest, unmoving from his position in the corner. It had taken Lady Catelyn longer than anyone might have expected to accept his new position in her family, and even though she now didn't snap at his every action, she did ignore him with every inch of a lady's superiority and grace. Thus, the fact that she'd invited him to her private solar was surprising, to say the least. But when he'd entered, Lady Catelyn had looked so pale and small behind the desk that he'd bit his tongue and held his peace. Something was wrong, that much was clear. Something had happened, and it made his chest feel as hollow as a thrice-broken clay pot. Yes, said Lady Catelyn. Her eyes flicked to Jon, and then back to Sansa before she handed her a neatly folded letter. From Robb just this morning, she told them. I read it only minutes ago. Sansa frowned, reaching for it. Jon leveraged himself up and moved to stand behind her, reading over her shoulder. Arya and Bran are missing, along with the Reed children. There was a battle. As near as we can tell, they were taken during it. We spoke to the wildlings who claimed they had them, but they said they escaped. We've no idea where they are now. Mention the wall. I'm going there now. Arya and Bran are missing? Sansa asked, and Jon recognized the tone. It was the cold, dangerous one she used before she delivered an ultimatum. It was the voice of a warrior, of a queen. Yes, whispered Lady Catelyn. Sansa tossed her hair, shoved herself away from him, and said evenly, I'll leave for the north tomorrow. Send a raven to Winterfell tonight, Mother. You can't leave, Jon protested. What about the treaties? What about them? A half year of work is just going to be lost. You think I care? Sansa snarled. Bran, Jon, Arya. Who gives a damn about treaties and martells and idiotic marriage alliances when our family is missing? They could be dead for all you know, she bit out. Jon flinched. He wanted desperately to saddle his horse and ride out immediately, there was no doubt about it. But Lady Catelyn was worrying, and Sansa would instinctively respond to that, and at least one of them had to keep their heads through this mess. Just because, under any other condition, he would have ridden out without hesitation didn't mean he had to make the same decision now. I know, he said quietly, keeping a firm hold on his temper. But we have to believe they aren't. And if they're not, then Robb's going to be the only hope they have. There's nothing we can do. Nothing. Nothing but make Westeros a safer place for them to walk in, Jon continued, pitilessly. Which means finishing this job and only then going home. Which means doing this job well and properly. Which means getting as many allies as we can before we face the major enemy, Sansa, or have you forgotten that? Sansa bowed her head and turned away. After a long, breathless moment, her shoulder slumped. Fine, she said. Raised her head. Mother, abruptly looking at her, she sighed, the breath gusting out of her like a sail faltering when turning away from the wind. You wish to go back. I go where I must, Lady Catelyn replied simply. You needed me before, but you've better knowledge of this now than I ever will. And now, I've 2 children missing and another who is too young to be forgotten in all this. Rickon needs me, and if Arya and Bran are recovered, they will need me as well. I will leave as soon as I can. Sansa swallowed hard and then nodded. A faint, watery smile crinkled the corners of her lips. Of course. She pushed the letter away gently and nodded again. I will miss you, she told her mother formally. Then she turned and walked out of the room stiffly. Jon hesitated for barely a moment before jumping out of his pose and following her. Sansa had good masks, had immense strength, but she'd always told him that she couldn't bear it if anything happened to any of them. She'd lost them in another life. She couldn't bear such a loss again. And now her deepest fears had been realized. Sansa moved gracefully, elegantly, showing nothing of desperation in her sweeping movements until she'd arrived at their bedchamber. She fumbled with the door handle, and when it didn't open immediately, a sharp, high sound erupted from her throat. Jon stepped forward and moved her away, as gently as he could without properly touching her. He knew exactly what would break Sansa, and just then she was holding on to the dregs of her composure with the tips of her fingernails, her pride and little else. A moment later, he'd gotten the door open and was shuffling her inside, a hand pressing against her shoulder blades. As soon as the door shut, though, Sansa shuddered and let out a sob just loud enough to make Jon's chest ache. He moved forward, hands skittering over her shoulders uneasily, unknowing what would make her feel worse. Sansa stepped into his embrace, near collapsing against his chest, and let her tears soak his collar. And if Jon let a few of his own fall as well, there was no one there to see it. Oberyn slapped the flat of his hand against the table. Queen Sansa had delayed speaking to the Dornish delegation for another 3 days, and for all that Oberyn was insulted by it, it wasn't as if she'd met with anyone else during that time. She'd refused to leave her rooms, in fact, and only emerged 2 nights previous when her mother left for Winterfell. There was no news as to why, no hints, just a whisper from a servant girl that the queen had looked agitated when she left her mother's solar one morning. But she'd said that Sansa was nowhere near emotional enough to countenance 3 days of solitude. There were infinitely more questions than answers. And now, when she finally deigned to sit and speak to Oberyn and his people, she wasted hours talking about Tyrell tariffs instead of anything useful. His patience had run out ages ago. It was only a healthy wariness of her husband's prickly presence, and certainly that was a new development. Him actually attending these meetings, though he refused to sit and act anything less than utterly impatient with the whole affair that had kept Oberyn from shouting. And that wariness had dissipated as his temper flared incredibly, terrifyingly, satisfyingly hot. "I do not care for your taxes or your bloodless answers to injustice," he hissed, distrusting himself to speak louder and maintain control. "I do not know how you Northerners answer violations of the law, but I know how we Dornish do, and I want blood." Sansa studied him for a long moment before asking evenly, "What violations?" "Elia," Oberyn snarled, and only just managed to claw himself back from the edge. "My sister is dead," he said after a pause. "I have not received a single blood price for her death save for her body, save for her children's body, as if they were a whore and her bastard children, as if Elia wasn't a princess in her own right." He breathed deep, averted his face, and went on, "I want blood, Queen Sansa. I've waited almost 2 decades for it. I want blood, your grace, or I will take it. Do you understand?" "Is that a threat?" Jon asked, suddenly standing straight, looking far more dangerous than any 19-year-old boy deserved to look. "Prince Oberyn." "That wasn't a threat," Sansa said, as cold and cutting as steel. Oberyn jerked his head down in a sharp nod, and Jon subsided, looking irritated. She continued, "Tell me, Prince Oberyn, whose blood do you wish for?" "Tywin Lannister is dead. Jaime Lannister has lost his sword hand, and is as feeble as a newborn calf, on the days he recognizes his surroundings. Tyrion Lannister is my chosen heir to the west. Do you wish for me to offer up Myrcella? Tommen perhaps to sate your bloodthirst? An 11-year-old boy to answer for his mother's sins?" "I care nothing for them," Oberyn told her coldly. "I want the mountain. He yet lives, does he not?" "He does live," one of her ladies answered reluctantly, when it looked like Sansa wouldn't. "Though he is under no lord's rule now, he's last been seen ravaging the Riverlands." Oberyn leaned forward, eyes narrowed on Sansa. "Give me free rein to go and kill him, Your Grace, and I'll sign whatever documents you want." Sansa blinked at him. She'd gone slightly rigid when he leaned forward, her cheeks paling, but her pretty blue eyes seemed to flash with something that was 2 parts indignant and only 1 part fear. His advisors, ready to haggle and push percentages a fraction here or there, shuffled, distressed. Who knew what Dorne stood to lose under Oberyn's impatience? If Dorne had been there, Oberyn knew, he'd have shaken his head and sighed exasperatedly. After a long pause, Sansa set her shoulders and straightened her back and firmed her jaw, and Oberyn knew her answer before she even opened her mouth. "I cannot." "No? Tell me, how can the ruler of Westeros not be able to do something?" "The Westerlands are an independent kingdom," she said softly. "Or they will be, soon enough. I cannot. I will not infringe upon the rights due Lord Tyrion as a king." "So this is how it is to be." He rose to his feet and stepped closer to her. "You hold the Iron Throne, Queen Sansa, and you will not use this power to bring justice. You will use it to preserve some paltry form of stability. Little wonder, isn't it, soon you'll go back north. And then what will you care about wars in the south?" Weaponless, almost a half-head shorter and slender enough to mark scarce half his shoulder width, Sansa Stark didn't flinch. Oberyn was impressed. He'd known grown fighters who'd pissed themselves when he was half as angry as he was now. "Are you threatening war if I don't hand over Ser Clegane?" Oberyn moved even closer. His hand flexed against his side, aching for the warm, welcoming weight of a spear. "I am threatening." "Watch yourself," Jon snapped, stepping forward and half unsheathing his sword. In response, Obara drew a knife that she'd been hiding somewhere. Tree-Stain straightened and shifted closer to the door. Alaria flung out an arm to keep Nymeria in her seat. The Northerners, one of them, the same girl who'd spoken to him 3 days previous, angled herself towards the door, and the other one, the one who'd spoken to Srake. Everyone froze at the sharp, high-pitched sound. They were suddenly, abruptly aware of what had nearly occurred. Into that silence, Sansa exhaled loudly and then snapped, "Everyone, out." Oberyn winced, retreating a half-step. Her husband drew back just as slowly, his sword disappearing into its sheath easily. Obara did something complicated with her hand, storing the knife in her sleeve again. Alaria relaxed, fractionally. When still nobody moved, Sansa lifted her chin, eyes flashing. "Did you not hear me?" Heads bowed, they rose to their feet and began to troop out. Her husband remained too, though she seemed perfectly willing to forget him behind her. Oberyn was nearly out the door when he heard her mutter something to Jon, and then, louder, "Prince Oberyn, a word, if you please." "I've just prodded your husband into bearing steel," he thought, stepping back into the room. "Why would you wish to see me again?" "If he's staying, so am I," Jon told her firmly. "If he hurts me," Sansa replied, "you've full right to toss him from the same window Cersei Lannister threw herself off of. But you will not stay here now, Your Grace." Strangely enough, he flinched at the title, but then he bent down and whispered something in her ear that made her sigh deeply. When he was done, she looked up at him and nodded. "We'll talk about this later," he murmured, just loud enough for Oberyn to hear, and walked away. Sansa waited for the door to click shut before turning to him. "I would like to remind you that when you came to King's Landing, you came as an envoy of Dorne." Abruptly, the hard look on her face shifted into one of weariness. She sighed and sank onto a chair. "Prince Oberyn, would you truly refuse a crown simply because you don't have Ser Clegane's head? Does your personal vendetta measure up against your people's desire that much?" "My people desire vengeance as well." "Do they?" Sansa asked quietly. "Elia Martell was a martyr, but she has been dead for nearly 2 decades. Is it not better to let sleeping ghosts lie?" "Is it better to forget where you have come from?" Oberyn asked rhetorically, rolled his shoulders and sank into the chair as well. "I cannot answer you, Your Majesty. But I do know that it isn't right to let these people walk free when they've committed such crimes." Sansa ran a hand down a stack of paperwork before nodding slowly. "I cannot give you the mountain," she told him. "I cannot be seen giving you the mountain." "What?" Oberyn felt his brows pull together, confusion knitting with sudden hope. "He is a Westerland's bannerman, and I refuse to damage Lord Tyrion's standing amongst his men by demanding Ser Clegane." She shuffled through the papers, finally lifting one out. "But that does not mean that I want him to remain at large. The man is a menace and one that ought to be taken care of." She handed him the paper. "That might interest you." Oberyn took the paper and scanned it. His eyebrows rose higher the further down the page he'd gone. "Is this a spy report?" She smiled, small and real. Then it faded into a look of pure determination as she leaned forward. "Tell me, Prince Oberyn, how well do you know Princess Myrcella?" He blinked, startled. "Not well. Is there a reason for it?" "You haven't spoken recently to Prince Trystane, then?" Oberyn frowned. "I have. Why?" "Because they've been taking long walks in the gardens," Sansa told him. "Within the bounds of propriety, perhaps, but only just. And I think if I can make them happy, I should." He frowned, parsing through her meaning, and felt his stomach lurch. No, it will not work. Even if Doran countenanced it, and nothing says that he would, Tyrion Lannister would never agree to a marriage contract." "Prince Trystane is a second son," Sansa countered. "Additionally, Princess Myrcella is a woman whose marriage prospects for the near future are determined by me. Lord Tyrion has no say in them so long as I remain Queen of Westeros. And anyhow, why would he refuse a marriage when the best he can hope for after this is an advantageous one with a Riverlander lord?" "Why are you even bringing this up?" he asked finally. It was rather a lot to absorb, this newfound romance between his nephew and the princess. Oberyn blinked and waited for Sansa to answer him. When she spoke, her voice was slow, as if she were forming the ideas as she spoke them. "Because Princess Myrcella will be leaving for the Westerlands in a week," she said. "If you wish to truly find the mountain, you will accept this marriage contract. We shall announce it 2 days before the coronation ceremony, and then you shall take a ship and sail to the Westerlands to ostensibly escort her to Dorne. You will go alone, and along the way your ship will suffer an unfortunate accident. And then you shall head into the Riverlands under the cover of darkness, take whatever vengeance you wish to take on Ser Clegane. If you survive, you will take Princess Myrcella and return to Dorne." "And if I don't survive?" "Then you die," she said, plain and honest and brutal for it. "There will be contingencies, of course. You will not be able to tell anyone what you truly intend to do, for example." "Of course not," he murmured. Then, curiosity overcoming him, Oberyn asked, "Tell me, do you truly believe that you will be successful in breaking Westeros apart?" "Yes," she said quizzically. "Do you think I won't be, Your Grace?" "I think." He turned and dug through a pile of papers left behind by one of her ladies. He'd seen what he was looking for. He knew that he had. He found it and turned back to Sansa, spreading a map of Westeros between them with a flourish. "If there isn't a war in a few years, you'll be lucky." Oberyn smoothed the worn corners down with his fingers and met Sansa's gaze smoothly. He hoped she listened to him. If nothing else, she was young, and the young were willing to at least listen to others before actually acting. And all her actions up to this point spoke to a disposition for even-handed consideration before making decisions. Gods, if they'd had a good ruler all these years, who knew what they could have achieved? Arhys had been a madman. Nobody ever dreamed of disputing that. Rhaegar wouldn't have been a much better king, always lost in dreams instead of paying attention to what was right in front of him. And Robert had hated the Iron Throne and all it represented from the very start. He'd waited against Lyanna Stark and found it utterly wanting, and in the end the realm had paid the price. But Sansa Stark had a deft hand, a quick smile, a quicker mind. She had a cold-blooded steadiness running through her bones, and a quicksilver desire to remake the world that Oberyn had last seen on a young, gilt-edged Cersei Lannister, yet unbroken by her husband's cruelties. Sansa had a dream, and the ability to see it through. It was terrifying to watch. It was humbling, what it was. "Which realms will be at war?" Sansa asked. Reached forward and tapped her finger against the map. Against a specific region of the map. "Dorne will be content with your brother, won't they, your grace? And the Reach won't rebel against the Tyrells, they're happy enough." "And the Stormlands? The Vale?" Oberyn pointed to each in turn, finally stabbing his finger against Pike. "The Iron Islands? They'll be happy, will they?" "The Iron Islands will accept Asha," Sansa sighed. It must have been an old argument. She sounded impatient with it. "She's the only Ironborn that I can support that doesn't want to return to their old ways of pirating and looting, that's actually likely to take the Seastone chair. She'll convince her bannermen, I'm sure of it." "And what is the problem with the Vale? Sweet Robin is the only remaining trueborn Arryn. They'll follow him when he comes of age. And until then? They'll follow Lord Yohn Royce." She shrugged. "He's rather a well-liked man, your grace. There are no problems I can see there." "Apart from Robert Arryn's sickliness," Oberyn pointed out. "I cannot simply order him to get better," she replied, eyes rolling the tiniest bit, irreverent as only a ruler could be of the throne they sat. Oberyn let a laugh bubble out of his chest at the sight. "No," he said, "but it is a problem. One so distant in the future that I wouldn't name it one," Sansa said crisply. Oberyn shrugged easily and changed the topic. "And the Stormlands? They're already threatening rebellion. And you're placing a 13-year-old girl as head of that proud kingdom." He shook his head. "It won't survive a year." "It will survive 5, Sansa said softly. She measured him with her eyes and then smiled, slow and dignified as a queen's shade. "Elia," Oberyn thought, and cut it off before he could egg too much. "You must have heard of what happened when King Renly lays siege to his brother at Dragonstone." Oberyn nodded. "Of course I have," he said. "But what does that have to do with anything?" "The Tyrells retreated," she said. "The Tyrells retreated, your grace, and they did not retreat alone." "Gods above, does she mean?" "They took prisoners," Oberyn said a little numbly. "Precisely." She shook her braid over her shoulder. "The Tyrells are prisoners, the heirs and knights and able-bodied sons of the Stormlords. What do you think I had to give to convince them to keep the prisoners for another few years?" "I couldn't hope to guess." "Well, which realm does the Reach dread the most?" "The Iron Islands," Oberyn said slowly. Her head tipped forward a bare fraction. "An Ironborn ruler who doesn't support their old way was of enough interest to the Tyrells to agree to keep the men prisoners. And of course, the Tyrells are known for their marriages, aren't they? I'm sure it won't take very long for the notices to wing across the ruins of Summerhall, particularly if there are any heirs in the Tyrells' clutches." It was brutally efficient in its simplicity. In one fell stroke, she ensured the Reach was content, the Stormlands were forcibly pacified, the Iron Islands were not left to run wild, and she did all this without so much as letting on what she was doing. Oberyn inhaled slowly, through the gaps in his teeth. "It gives too much strength to the Reach," he said. "They've neutralized the Stormlands. They've forged a peace treaty with the Iron Islands. Tell me, is your uncle happy with it? And anyhow, how will this stop the Stormlords who don't have sons held hostage from invading the Reach? The Riverlands will gain dominion over the vast majority of the Crownlands, seeing as they didn't have a ruler anyhow," Sansa replied calmly. "The Stormlords who bend the knee easily to Lady Shireen are also being given parcels of land. Lord Penrose is being given Dragonstone, for example, and Lord Selmy is being given Driftmark. Other small bits of land are being given directly to Lady Shireen." You're making the Riverlands act as a buffer, Oberyn said and shook his head. You're strengthening the Stormlands with land and keeping the Tyrells placated with good gods. Little wonder your brother fled north as soon as he could, if this was what you decided upon. Her lips quirked. Robb is many things. A politician, not so much. Not when he doesn't have to be, at least. The people call you good with words, he said slowly. Good at inspiration. But ruling is a different animal altogether. No, this is what ruling is, taking 100 people who hate each other and making them sit quietly, ensuring that they create something greater than anything they can do alone. There are those who kill for it, Sansa said, hands flat against the table. I will never understand them. What is the glory in this office? It is only hunching over papers until your eyes water. It is only giving your blood and your life to a land that will never offer anything back. It is tiring. Oberyn arched an eyebrow. If only so many others understood that. Sansa sighed and then nodded, another small smile pulling at her lips, and she pulled a blank page out of the pile. Would you be amenable to drafting the contract now, Prince Oberyn? Oberyn breathed out, just as slowly as he'd breathed in. Elia, he thought now, limbs old and drawn and worn with time, all the aches that Elia would never know. All the losses and triumphs and joys Oberyn had experienced in the 19 years following Elia's death that she never would. But at the core of him, he was still her younger brother. He might be old and bent when he met her next, but he'd always be the bloody-kneed little boy chasing her in the water gardens when he thought of his sister. And next to this pale-eyed, dark-haired queen, next to this coldly dignified, painfully lovely girl, how could he not think of her? Elia, oh, was this your destiny? To be a queen and a force to be reckoned with? Gods above, we lost so much when we lost you, and I'll always mourn your kindness, your softness. But the world lost so very, very much more. I see so much of you in her. Of course, he said, and it was a smile pulling at his lips. He realized suddenly, a smile of warmth and wonder and a slow-building, arcing desire to see this world Sansa would craft. Jon was waiting for Sansa when she returned. It was almost past dusk, and Sansa had walked into the meeting with the Dornish delegation just after breakfast. She was worn out like a wrung-out cloth, and yet happy with it. Soon enough, they'd be able to finalize everything. Really, the hardest work was finished, and the euphoria buzzed in her veins stronger than any arbor gold. Sansa, Jon said when she stumbled into their bedchamber. Sansa turned a goofy smile on him, barely closing the door before balancing on one foot to pull off her slippers. All she wanted was to sleep, or perhaps to kiss Jon until she couldn't tell which way was up and made her impatient, and simultaneously giggly, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd ever felt so utterly not in control. Jon, she cooed, stumbling forward. Oh gods, it's over. I'm done. I can actually rest. Sansa, he said again. His hands came up and wrapped around her waist, steadying her, though she thought she saw something flicker across his mouth like a frown. Then, in a voice too flat to belong in Sansa's world tonight, he asked, Can we talk? Of course. She spun away and then sank onto the bed, reaching out and tangling her hand with his. Talk away. I don't promise to listen, Jon. I've spent the last 6 months listening to everyone. But go on. I like your voice anyway. He frowned. Are you drunk, Sansa? No, she laughed. Maybe a little. Oberyn gave me a little Dornish wine after we signed. It was supposed to be I wanted to talk to you about that, actually. Sansa lolled her head towards him. About what? His lips twisted. Prince Oberyn, or Oberyn, as you seem to prefer. I haven't called anyone by their titles in these rooms, she pointed out lazily. Also, Prince Oberyn's rather too long to say. Exhausting, don't you think? I'd rather not think about it, Jon said darkly. Sansa shoved at his shoulders. Good gods, spit it out. I'm not going to figure it out, sweetling, not before you turn red as a plum. Not tonight, at least. He chewed over it for a moment, and then his shoulders slumped. I waited outside the door while you were doing, whatever queenly thing you were doing, signing documents and all. Father says signing documents is the most important part of a monarch's rule. She rolled over so that she was half on top of him and sighed contentedly. I think my hand'll fall off if I do it anymore. John coughed. Anyhow, I was standing there, and Ilaria Sand walked up to me and started talking. And she wouldn't stop, if you take my meaning. I don't, Sansa informed him cheerfully. But go on. She told me that the Dornish have open marriages, and so long as we're both consenting, she'd like to take me to bed, John blurted out. And that Oberyn would love to do it for you, too. Sansa blinked again, and then one last time, and burst into peals of laughter. Oh, how did you react? She choked out. I turned white, went faint. I only walked away. Did you? Sansa asked, lips still twitching. Or did you fall into a heap and try to restart your blushing heart first? Give me some credit, he answered, turning away, shoulders hunched as if wounded. I managed to get here before I did that, didn't I? Sansa laughed again and slumped back against the pillows. She watched, through half-lidded eyes, as John began to move her slippers and cloak back to their respective positions. It was a part of sharing a room that had come as a full surprise for her that John was so particular about cleanliness. But it was something Sansa cared little about either way, and so it had been easy enough to notice where he placed some things and maintain them. Now, as he did so, she felt something a little heavier than laughter slide up her throat. Perhaps the drink was loosening its hold, allowing her to think properly for the first time in ages, but she was sure that John had something else to say to her. Oberyn would love to do it for you too. Were you jealous, she thought, but didn't finish. The rest of the sentence got swallowed up by something as sweet and thick as honey wrapping around her throat, sinking into her lungs, floating through her veins. Oh, thought Sansa, simply reaching out a hand to John. Oh, very well then. This is what love tastes like, isn't it? Thicker than affection, softer than laughter, brighter than kindness. It made her press the sensitive skin along the inside of her wrist to John's curls, made her arch her back and kiss him, hard and bruising and absolutely incredibly perfect. Later, hours later, they lay against the bed, panting and sweaty. They were already late for the dinner banquet, and Alice had made 3 pointed comments about how the other courtiers were discussing the impropriety of their new queen and king during her meeting that morning before breakfast. Sansa closed her eyes and pressed closer to John. I've always loved you, Sansa whispered against the bare, soft skin of his chest. Only you, John? Before I knew what to call it. Before I knew I could. John propped himself on his elbow and looked down at her, eyes softer than any smooth silk could hope to be. He breathed, and reached forwards and pressed a kiss to her cheek, and then her forehead, and then her nose, and finally her lips. They missed dinner that night. I give up, Willa told Alice. The dinner was good, and the food was flavored with Dornish spices heavy enough that it was just too spicy to eat easily, light enough that it was addictive. Wellard compensated for the burning on her tongue with 3 goblets of sour Dornish wine, and it had pooled a nice warmth at the base of her belly, one that let her ignore the ache in her leg. Do you? Alice looked particularly lovely in the lamplit feast hall, Willa thought. Had they not been in the South, had they not been so closely watched by everyone who considered their actions a commentary on Sansa's, well, she might have done something mad, that was all. Had she asked her father? She knew what he'd say, a kiss is not madness. But her mother would have said, A kiss is a sweeter kind of madness, sweetling, but a madness all the same. And Willa knew her duty enough to know that if she pressed, Alice would give in, and they loved Sansa too much to do that to her. They were both of them too ambitious by far to sacrifice their lives for whatever this was. Still, even if Willa would never feel Alice's silk soft hair run through her hands, even if Willa would never kiss Alice as she wanted to, she could talk. She could flirt and enjoy the frustration in Alice's eyes that mirrored her own. "I'll never figure it out," Willa told her. "There are too many northern men to identify, and Adair is too good at secrets." "Then here's a hint. He isn't a northerner." Alice's eyes flicked up, a blue-gray as lovely as any snowfall, as deadly as any snowstorm. Willa felt her heart speed up, an ugly red creep over her cheeks, and shifted, jumpy as a spring hare. In a slightly futile attempt to pretend all was normal, she pulled the first name that came to mind. "Theon Greyjoy?" "I suppose I owe you a bag of stags," Alice murmured, stirring the vegetables in her plate delicately. Willa's jaw dropped. "Theon?" she demanded, a little too loud for comfort. Then, softer though no less intense, she hissed, "Theon, Alice? Theon Greyjoy isn't understandable. No, he isn't." "Are you telling me that Idara seduced him?" "I'm telling you that she wanted to," Alice responded. Then, sighing, "It might not go anywhere. But I rather think she might have a chance. When we go back, he'll still be there, won't he? Doesn't seem in a hurry to return to the Iron Islands at any rate. And it's a nice match, too." "It isn't a nice match the way a forest fire is nice," Willa said flatly. "They'll eat each other alive and leave a slew of bodies behind them. See if they don't. And Adair is going to get her heart broken, poor girl, even if she doesn't let it happen easily." "But the betting would be wonderful in the interim," Alice offered, eyes flashing suddenly, wickedly. Willa choked, feeling the laugh catch in her throat, the flush deepening. She exhaled slowly, shakily, and wondered when she'd last felt like she wasn't drowning. But oh, what a wonderful way to go, she thought, and threw her head back, releasing the laughter into the hall. They were young, and so was the night. Willa might never know the pleasant weight of Alice's head in her lap, but she did know the edges of Alice's tongue. Willa knew her fears and her pleasures. She knew Alice, and that would always be worth more to her than any warm pressure of lips or teeth or fingers. Perhaps it wouldn't be enough, years later, when they were faced with potential husbands and their families. Perhaps then, Willa would curse herself for her patience, for her cowardice, but right there, right then, she was content. It was enough. It was a cool sunny morning when the kings and queens, or their chosen representatives, entered the Godswood. This was to be a private ceremony, with only the closest family and friends of each ruler present. Later, they'd ride to the Great September of Baelor and allow the Septon to crown them. More of the rulers were followers of the Seven, after all, and they wished to be crowned by their own faith. But before that, they'd be crowned here, before the old gods, in the northern fashion. The rulers all wore their own colors in their own fashions. Some were followed by close family members or advisors, but they each looked in the blinding morning light unbreakable. They looked beautiful and young, all of them, as if they had eternity stretching out before them, as if they were the very messengers of the gods. This is what a new era looks like, John thought, hands flat against his thighs. This is what change looks like. They knelt, each of them, Edmure in his silver and scarlet doublet, Asha in a black and gold gown covered with a breastplate, the hem cutting into long strands that emulated seaweed, Shireen in a blue-black gown that had lightning-pale stags embroidered against the hems, Robert in a bluish doublet that hung loose at the sleeves and a cape slashed to look like a falcon's wings, Oberyn in sunny yellow and brilliant orange, Garland Tyrell, resplendent, and Tyrell, resplendent resplendent, a red as defiantly, sharply reminiscent of blood as simple cloth could manage. Sansa, painfully colorless in her lilac gown, covered in a paler cloak of stark blue and white, looked almost ghostly under the red dragon's breath, flowers and the dark smoke berries. Jon had dressed in a doublet of black with red accents, a subtle throwback to his Targaryen heritage that Sansa had insisted on. A reminder that no one needed, Jon had said, but Sansa had only leveled a look at him as flat as the deserts of Dorne and said, "A Targaryen took their crowns 3 centuries ago, and a Targaryen will give them back. It is only right, Jon," and she wouldn't hear another word of it.
And so Sansa stepped forward and anointed them with a paste made from weirwood sap and a powder made from weirwood bark. She wore her own crown, a silvered medal that rose in a varying pattern of 3 repetitions, a wolf's muzzle, a dragon's wing, and her own personal heraldry, a dove's head. The rulers looked pale, Jon decided. Pale but determined, and it made a firelight in his blood to think that he and Sansa had achieved this historic moment. Sansa anointed them quietly, leaning forward occasionally to whisper something into their ear. Jon followed, placing a crown on their head. Once he did, they rose, and every person there hailed them as king or queen. Once the last of them was finished, a jaunty-eyed Oberyn, Sansa stepped back. She told Jon that he'd be the first one to speak to them here, in the silence of the Godswood, but when he'd asked what he'd be expected to say, she'd only shrugged. Which left him wrong-footed before all these people, most of whom he'd never even spoken to before. And yet, as he looked at them, each bright-eyed and hopeful, all he could think of was his father, his uncle. All Jon could think of was Ned Stark, his honor and the bone-deep strength he'd passed down to his children. "You are rulers now," Jon told them. "There is a responsibility to that. A responsibility handed down from the gods, some might even say." He breathed deep, let the scent of oak and pine ground him. "But we're human, all of us first. We'll make mistakes, and those mistakes are going to have consequences because we've so much more power. The important thing is to keep trying to become better than what we are. We are the rulers of Westeros, and we cannot be held to the measures of our citizens." "It is a hard, thankless job," Sansa said, stepping forward so her shoulders matched his. She was almost of a height with him, and the gods only knew what image they presented to the others, the White Wraith Queen and her Black Demon King, but it seemed to be a powerful one, for they all seemed to gain new confidence from it. "It is a job that drives you mad and leaves you with only ashes in your mouth, but it is something that has to be done, and we are the only ones who can, and so we shall." Jon felt his lips curve into a smile. "Chin up," he murmured, and led them out of the Godswood. After they were crowned in the September, they returned to the Red Keep for a feast. Jon was rather done with the crowd. He simply wanted to return to his rooms and perhaps sleep off the screaming and the stench. But no, he was a king, and he had to remain behind. "I've never seen a king scowl at his own feast so blackly," he heard a voice say, before Oberyn Martell swung himself down to sit next to him. Jon let his face darken. "That unhappy about the power change, your grace?" Jon ignored the faint mockery. "Don't tell me you actually enjoy this, ruckus." He waved a hand at a purple-painted man who was attempting to swallow a sword. A moment later, the man set his sword on fire, and Jon felt his face twist in grotesque, unwilling interest. A smaller banquet wouldn't have been such a waste of money. "You would have gotten along with Stannis Baratheon, then," Oberyn replied, guzzling his wine. The man hated anything that was even the slightest bit frivolous. Except Stannis didn't care much for his wife, according to all the rumors. And the reason I want to lock myself in my bedroom is almost entirely due to my wife. That pale gown had looked ghostly, perhaps, in the Godswood, but under the brilliant sunlight of mid-afternoon, she looked like nothing less than a goddess come to earth. Jon really just wanted to drag her into their bedchamber and not leave for 3 days. "Perhaps," Jon said, shrugging. But Oberyn didn't go away. "According to all the rumors, you and Queen Sansa don't fight." He winked. "Tell me, how do you manage that?" Lesser men wish to know. "By being respectful of her demands," Jon said flatly. "We talk, Prince Oberyn. My apologies if your lesser men do not know such."
Oberyn grinned toothily. So you're the one to sacrifice then? When will it become too much, Your Grace? How much can you abandon before you've given up everything? You took her name, received your title through her. How much more? Sansa had said she liked Oberyn, which meant that he hadn't asked her these impertinent questions. Jon was rather glad of it, because she had bigger things on her mind than what others saw in her husband, and she had to pay attention to those bigger things. Best he be the one to nip it in the bud, right here. When I stood before a heart tree and wed Sansa, I swore to give her all that I am and have, he said, and she swore to do the same. We are Starks, Prince Oberyn. We always keep our vows. I am hers and she is mine, and no name or circlet or title can change that, and that is the simple truth of it. So you don't care that she makes you stand in court? He asked curiously. Stand? She hasn't offered you a chair. Jon felt his lips twitch, almost against his will. Sansa would love it if you could get me to sit in on the meetings, he told Oberyn. I simply find that I cannot sit still for long enough. And if I do sit in on some meetings, I'll become overprotective, which is why she sends me away, as you've seen. Oberyn arched an eyebrow and then bowed out of their conversation suddenly. When Jon turned to see what his focus had turned to, he saw an Ironborn captain speaking to a girl in Dornish silks. It was startling, the size difference. The captain was a large man, made even larger by his armor, and the girl was almost half his height, perhaps a fourth his broadness. One of Oberyn's daughters, Jon noted, and watched as Oberyn clamped a firm hand on the captain's arm, steering him away. The girl exhaled in relief, walking closer to him. A moment later, Jon realized that the girl wasn't so much relieved as frustrated. I suppose I'm not the only overprotective one, he thought, and laughed to himself before squinting into the sunlight to find Sansa. That night, Asha Greyjoy rode away with her fleet. Sansa told her she'd miss her and meant it. Asha was a sharp-edged woman, all steel and salt, and in another time Sansa might have disliked her for her sharp tongue and ease with weaponry. But in this one she felt that there was some kind of a power to be found in seeing a woman take the reins of power with no thought for her sex or her faults. But when Asha did row away, Sansa didn't dispute the idea that she was relieved. 50 longships in the Bay of Blackwater, ready to break out in war if necessary, it was enough to make her shudder. As a result, Sansa had done the same thing Tyrion had done in the last battle of the Blackwater, load a single ship with wildfire, and maintain that in a small, hidden cove until it became necessary to use it. Thankfully enough, it hadn't been necessary. And now, hopefully, it never will be. The next morning, both the Vale and the Reach left. The day after that, Dorne. A week later, the Lannisters and the Baratheons marched away. Sansa sent her court back to the north after that, seeing their impatience and desire for home. She and Jon remained to smooth over the handover to her uncle. A thankless job, Sansa said, and her head bowed. One that must be done, she'd added, and so straightened her spine. Weeks later, they finally left King's Landing. It was just Jon and Sansa, escorted by Tully guards perhaps, but with no one they knew. This would be as close to privacy as they'd ever get, and both understood that very well. Sansa started waking up early in the mornings, started teaching Jon to braid her hair, learning how to sharpen a sword. There were still so many things to fear. Westeros was split apart peacefully, bloodlessly, but Robb was still out battling wildlings, and Bran and Arya were still missing. Daenerys Targaryen was coming, and Sansa still wasn't sure how to deal with her and her dragons. And after all of this, even if they dealt with all of it, the others would rise and bring the darkness with them. Sansa breathed deep and reached for Jon, felt the beat of his pulse against her fingers. They had 1,000 things to fear. It left her shaking, sometimes, the magnitude of what she'd done, of what she'd yet to do. Sansa had set out to change the world, and she'd done it. What if she'd done wrong? But even if they had 1,000 things to fear, they didn't fight for it. They never had. Sansa and Jon had always fought for love, The desperate kind that broke mountains and shattered stars, the kind that left no room for anything else inside their bodies. When they got up in the morning, they'd ride out and be as steel strong as their blood demanded. They'd be terrified, and they'd be brave, and they'd be as unbendingly strong as the kings and queens of legend. But here, in this darkness lit only by stars, Sansa took Jon's hand and pressed it to the thin line of her throat. "We'll be frightened," she thought. "We'll be brave. But first, oh gods, first we'll live. First we'll love."